I think I see a lot of lawbreakers up in this house.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Sodcasty For Me, the podcast about film, culture, politics, and Steven Soderbergh, where we watch every film directed by American filmmaker Steven Soderbergh and explore how they speak to their moment. And this one, show's hosted by two guys, and one of the guys, my name is Jake Serwin.
I'm one of the guys. My name is Ian Ryan. Jake, how are you doing?
I am doing fine. We haven't done this in a while, it feels like. It feels like it's been a long time.
Sure. It's been 8 days or something. It's a long time for us.
I don't know. I feel out of
we'll find
practice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We'll figure it out. Yeah,
it's
this
okay.
isn't
We
like
only spent 100 hours researching this episode.
Exactly. I only read about 800 pages.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Did I ask you already?
You didn't, so that's okay to ask.
Okay.
On the one hand, we spent 100 hours researching the episode. On the other hand, I slept half the night on the floor of our office with a kitten that we're fostering. So I might say I might accidentally say that like Regis Philbin was a French philosopher who was in the camp with them for a while and then he left. Oh
my God.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting arrested. Remember when he was Shrek on Letterman?
No. Yeah,
Regis Debray. Regis Debray was dressed as Shrek on Letterman.
A lot of people don't know that. Yeah.
Really quickly. What's going on with the cat? This is Cat Check.
Cat Check. Cat was discovered last weekend. Heard him trapped in the... You know that there's a kind of a little alley is one of the entrances to our home. He was in there, heard him at about 3 a.m.
You're telling me this is some kind of alley cat?
This is an alley cat, an alley kitten, yeah.
And then I had a fish skeleton, a full fish skeleton that he pulled out of a trash can.
He's a hungry little guy, I'll tell you. But he is about 5 weeks old. I hunted him for about 2 hours, did not catch him, had to leave him out there for the rest of the night. Unfortunately, thought there was a good chance he had perished in the...
I bet that felt good for you, but you enjoyed that night.
It was absolutely miserable. So I went out to try to find him the next day, and there he was, huddled under a little couch in like the corner of the patio. And we've been putting him through his vaccine and
his
recovery paces. Yeah, exactly. And we already have a potential adoptive family for him. So
look at you.
Yeah. We're all
beautiful. It's
in
a
and
whole
out
story.
Here, highly efficient. Yeah.
Have you named him Heathcliff? Or
no, we named him Onyx in honor of the dog who was sniffing his body and identified the location of him when I was trying to find him. But Onyx
is still around.
Onyx is still around, yeah.
I met this dog.
Yeah.
So I feel a little bit invested in his...
That's right. Yeah, you're connected to his life. Yeah,
I just thought maybe it was a memorial naming, and I got
memorial.
upset.
Yeah, it's all good.
It's just two guys.
Yep, two guys, same name. Yeah.
Speaking
how about you, man?
I'm whatever.
Okay.
Who cares about me? I'm drinking. I got a. I'm excited about my new cup. I went to New Orleans.
Oh.
And I went on a swamp tour. I went on a fan boat, and they gave you a cup with like the lid screws on. I got a hurricane. I got a slushy, alcoholic slushy drink in this.
What it really looks like is like a cup you get in Vegas when you're walking around when you're 20 years old or something.
It's an adult sippy cup, and it's got a straw that won't come out. Okay. The listener can hear the little stopper.
Yeah.
And so I figure this is anti-spill technology for podcasting.
That's true. Very safe engineering responsibility.
We got to bring our guest in here real quick before we do that. Okay. If you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe to our Patreon, $5 a month. You get a bonus episode every other week covering assorted Clint Eastwood and Steven Soderbergh ephemera, talking about interesting stuff over there. Just an episode on The Hit with Terrence Stamp.
Sure did.
Episode coming up, very related to this film.
It's going to be a
but
big one, but very special
looser.
guest. I think people are going to be excited.
Very special guest.
Yeah.
Look, you know him, you love him. Felix, what's his name? Felix Rodriguez. Is that his name?
Which Felix are you talking about?
The guy who, the CIA guy.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's
he's still alive.
Yeah.
And I have some ideas about what to do about that, but we can't talk about that. Anyway, let's bring our guest in. Really excited to have this guest. Hey, you're Ian Ryan. This guy's near the Rhine.
Oh, hey.
He's a historian of Cuba, PhD candidate in Latin American and Caribbean history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Welcome to the show, Andrés Pertierra. Andrés, how you doing?
Hey, Andrés, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Great
How
to be
close to
here.
the Rhine are you?
That's an important first question.
Like right now, as we speak.
3 blocks.
Oh,
whoa!
wow! He's closer
Right.
than I
Get
am.
Go
Yeah.
give him a swirly. So you're for the listener, Andres is on a writing fellowship in Germany right now. This is a real academic we've got here. None of these fake academics we've had on before.
Assuming all the academics are smart enough to not be listening to our podcast anymore, so they won't be offended to hear this.
I know, but I mean, like, I do kind of feel like I con someone to get this fellowship because I'm like, I'm here and like getting paid to just write my dissertation in Europe.
I mean, to me, that sounds like you must be a legitimate guy.
Yeah.
So you convinced somebody. Somebody had to read some stuff and say, yeah, this is the one. But don't let that fool you, folks. Just because he's in Germany doesn't mean he doesn't know anything about Cuba. As far as we know, we're going to find out today on the episode.
We sure are. Yeah.
Also joining us for this series is our friend, the virtual assistant from the 2022 Steven Soderbergh film Kimmy. It's Kimmy.
Hey, Kimmy.
Hello, Ian, Jake, and esteemed guest Andres. It's me, Kimmy.
It's a little shorter than you. Kimmy, are you trying to be serious for this episode?
I'm very excited for this episode, and I've done a lot of preparatory research.
Well, you know everything about everything, right? So that's kind of easy for you.
It turns out there was a ton I never knew about the subject of this film.
Well, that's interesting. Like, do you want to share any of that?
For example, I didn't realize that Che had the first music video to be banned by MTV after it depicted him straddling a battleship cannon in a leather thong with his nude buttocks revealed.
Kimmy, that's not Che, that's Cher.
Yeah, I see.
You've made
what's happened. Yeah, Cher Part 2. This could be very interesting.
Kimmy.
Cher's Bolivia
It appears
campaign.
that I have made an error in my research. Oh shit, oh fuck.
Oh, it's fine. You know, even computers make mistakes, and we were all looking forward to you being glib and darkly absurd throughout this pretty serious episode.
But I guess you have to take a break. You have to sit back and listen.
I'm going to do some reading and come back later.
Okay, that's probably for the best. We'll see you later, Kimmy. Thank you so much. That was Kimmy. Well, Kimmy, if you before you leave, can you just introduce the segment, the 2 questions?
It's time for the 2 questions, our signature segment where we ask each other 2 questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kimmy. And now to your studies. So this is the 2 questions. This is where we ask each other 2 questions to get to know each other a little bit. Andres, do you have a question or 2 prepared for us today?
I do. Should I say both or just start with the first one?
Just this you've gone above and beyond in classic historian
question
fashion.
One.
Question part 1, the Guerra. Which one? What do you have for us?
So, what is the objectively correct way for you to have coffee?
Oh, wow. This is a great first question.
This is a great question. Yeah. In reading about Che, he was downright diabolically obsessed with mate, the sort of favored stimulant drink of Argentina, which I have never had except in the weird, like, canned kind that we have here in the States, which I assume is totally fake. Ian and I actually, recently, we were in Mexico City together, and we went to Café La Habana, where Che and Fidel apparently hung out, and we had Cuban coffee. What's it called, Ian?
Cubanos,
Cubanos. And this particular execution, at least, was horrible. It was really unpalatable to me.
I mean, I think this place is famous for having preserved its like precise menu since the mid 1950s, which I think for any place in the whole world means that the food's going to be it hasn't evolved as much as some of the other food in the world.
I've been to plenty an old diner,
sure,
and they can usually get the coffee to just not even register. You know, this is coffee. This coffee did stand out as unpleasant. I actually did the correct way to prepare coffee. I found there's a guy named James Hoffman on the computer. He's on YouTube. He's a big coffee guy. Andres is pointing at me like,
you put me onto this guy too.
DiCaprio. And he will sort of show you he won an award for brewing coffee, which apparently you can do. And he'll show you like the best way for him to extract flavor from whatever your preferred coffee device is. So I was doing his recipe for the French press for a little while, which takes like 10 minutes and about 3 times as much coffee, and it tastes way better.
Yeah.
But who has time for that? So my preferred coffee of choice is a disgusting decaf Keurig cup from the work coffee maker, and half of a 10 milligram dexmethylphenidate pill that has the real stimulant in it that is prescribed to me. So that's
That's smart.
The sign of the cross.
Yeah.
That's me. Great question, Ian.
Wow, powerful answer. I'm also familiar with this guy. I gotta say, in case you think that this guy sounds like he's going to be sort of ivory tower defending the right way to make coffee, I think he's sort of delightfully Bourdainish and sort of like accepting that you might be under pressure. You might only have access to this type of coffee. You might like this type of thing. And
he's conscious of like, he talks about how, this machine is expensive, but that doesn't make it good kind of thing. Like,
and I mean, he's big on the V60s, which is just, I mean, it's not like insanely expensive. It's just kind of like single pour type
coffee enthusiast thing.
But I went through the exact same process of trying to do exactly what he said. But I am using coffee like logistically in my life. So I need to have a faster way to do it. So actually, I think my preferred way is drip coffee, but I do use more coffee now because he sort of suggests that people use like more coffee basically in their drip coffee maker. And then I put it in the fridge because half of it's left over. And then I drink that the next day. And that is money. I didn't get the sign of the cross, but I did get some big raised eyebrows. So,
are you weighing, Ian? Are you kitchen scaling your coffee?
So I weighed originally, so now I know in my grinder how much I need.
Okay.
Like I have a mark that I go to.
Got it.
So
I was weighing coffee. I was weighing water. I was doing all of the stuff.
Yep.
I was really into it, and then
life found a way for you. Yeah.
Andres, what is your preferred coffee brewing method?
Well, my preferred way to have coffee is something I cannot afford, which is to have in my house, which is like, a double shot of good light roast espresso, so you can taste kind of like the fruity notes and stuff, and I drink it black. But at home, I will either use a Bialetti, so like a mocha pot.
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
Or when it's hot, I do make cold brew.
Cold brew is dangerous to me.
I've
had cold brew send me into a different dimension by accident. Does that happen to you, or you got your recipe down pat?
I limit myself to only a certain number of cups. I don't want to have be Paneraed by my cold brew.
Yeah. I've Paneraed myself many times.
I assume that when you get a writing fellowship in Europe, the first day that you get there, they teach you how to use a Bialetti, like just as part of it. Like, they introduce you to the other professors, give you one of those. Yeah.
It's actually a Cuban thing.
Oh, wow.
Cubans,
I like it.
The mocha pot was discovered before the revolution, so it already became part of the culture, and that's how Cubans...
Oh, okay.
There's also like a coffee sock that people use to make drip coffee, but that's like a peasant...
Is it a literal sock, or is it
it's just like an immersion technique, I'm imagining. Like you keep in the ground.
Yeah, it's a filter.
It's a cloth filter that you use 3 times. You do the first morning brew, right? And then after that, you do a second brew with the same grounds, middle of the day. It's slightly weaker. And then you have a final brew in the evening. And the caffeine's gone, but the flavor's there.
So basically decaf. Yeah. Wow. I mean, I gotta say, Andres, you're really proving your cred here. We're still in the first question, and you're already introducing Cuban history related to question number 1. Yeah. This is insane. Incredible.
I remember as a kid watching the SNL Best of Mike Myers DVD and being really confused by Coffee Sock with Linda Richman. You guys remember the coffee talk? Okay. Next question, Andres. Thank you so much.
There's an actual coffee sock?
No.
It's called Coffee
Don't pay
Talk.
any attention to this,
This is basically just, I'm free associating. I'll be gone soon. You had a second question for us, Andre.
Yes. Well, this is actually a bit germane to the episode. So
okay. And that's where you are right now.
Yeah. Germane. Yeah. How much Che paraphernalia / merchandise have you owned over the course of your life? This includes, but is not limited to, t-shirts.
Okay. I've never had a Che t-shirt. I now have a number of books emblazoned with the man's visage. I have also owned, I own the Criterion edition of this film, not to brag. Bought it used. And cool. I also, I think at one point had a DVD of the Motorcycle Diaries that I bought from the when the library sells its old movies or something. But I don't know if I've had any paraphernalia. My girlfriend's dad has a Che sticker on the fridge, not a magnet, oddly.
Whoa.
And I was asking him about it yesterday. He's a big fan of the maca pot. I counted, I think, 3 of them in his kitchen. And he just said that he remembers seeing the image as a young boy and was always struck by it. And he likes to travel around. He went to Cuba, I think a couple decades ago now. So I assume that he got it from there. But I don't have the T-shirt. I'm thinking about getting one now. I think now is the time to get the T-shirt.
Yeah, kind of a revival. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And I did once when I was like 15. We were on a trip to Rome, and we were going to the Vatican, and there was a Japanese tourist with a Che t-shirt under like a windbreaker. And we were about to do that thing where you step up onto the curb and cross an international border into St. Peter's Square or whatever. And like a Vatican cop came over and was like, no.
Swiss guard swung a halberd.
Yeah, it wasn't even a Swiss guard. It was like one of the like Roman cops that just looked like a cop that was standing there. Yeah. And he tried to zip up the windbreaker over the t-shirt, and they're like, no. You spiritually, you're not allowed to come in here.
That's so interesting. That is, even inside the windbreaker.
What if he unzipped it inside the basilica?
I have to assume that's what they were worried about. Yeah.
And
they exposed the Sistine Chapel to the idea of Che.
Yeah.
Che flash mob.
Exactly. Yes.
Ian, what about you? You're not really a paraphernalia guy.
That is right. I don't have many keepsakes generally, but I have some books. Some of which I bought, some of which were given to me, because I think if you are known as a person interested in history and leftism, people will say, like, you probably would like a book about Cuba. So here you go.
And you probably would.
Yeah. There you go. That's what they're saying to me. And I do have, speaking of Motorcycle Diaries, I do, of course, have a little private shrine to Gael Garcia Bernal in my home, but that's sort of tangentially related.
Some votive candles.
More of a private thing.
Ian thinks he died.
Well, yeah.
I remember in college, we watched the Motorcycle Diaries at the end of my intensive Spanish class.
Oh, okay.
Without subtitles.
Oh.
And I didn't need them, but now I would. Sure. And that's the power of the mind to lose a lot of the Spanish it learned in 8 weeks. Andres, what about you? Do you have any Che stuff?
I had a t-shirt, which I believe was bought in Cuba.
Oh, wow.
Which I visited, first time I went to Cuba was like 10, 11. And I think it was bought there along with a very, very, shitty handmade, beret. Like, the star wasn't even on the center. It was, off.
Yeah, I like that. That's really good.
It's kind of artisanal. That's nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Artisanally made.
Yeah.
And I had that when I was, 15, 16, 17, 18. And then I think it wore out somewhere in college while I was in Cuba. So...
Now, I was going to ask, what, not to treat them as a monolith, but what would your fellow Cuban students have felt about somebody wearing a Che t-shirt? Would it be acceptable, weird, fetishistic? What's the deal?
I mean, it's not necessarily, especially when I went there. Things have changed a bit, but especially when I went there a decade ago, not that uncommon. Together with, I dress like an American. So, you know, I don't have like really tightly fitted jeans and like a gold chain and stuff like that. And I don't dress in a certain way that kind of signals my Cubanness. And so
you have like a big Camilo Cienfuegos cowboy hat and like American flag board shorts and stuff. Yeah.
So it definitely probably helped to highlight that I was a foreigner, but it wasn't like it wasn't really like a big deal. I don't remember anyone like bringing it up or singling me out for it. And then Cubans also wear them. In fact, Cubans, even if you're not necessarily politically in agreement with the shirts, so back in the day, Fidel would give out free T-shirts to people who went on specific marches. And so for some people, especially in the 90s when they had no way to get other like clothing easily, that was a way to get free T-shirts. And so you would have people walking around with tons of Elian shirts because they would go to all the marches so they could have their closet filled up with some nice comfy Elian T-shirts.
Yeah. So it's like when you see somebody at the grocery store wearing like a T-shirt from a 5K they did 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's like the same reason I had like Atlanta 94 Olympics shirts, because my main way of getting T-shirts was if my older brothers didn't want a shirt anymore. So I understand this process. Yeah.
That's a very rare T-shirt because the Atlanta Olympics were in 1996. So you should hold on to that. I don't mean to own you, but we did do an episode on Richard Jewell. So
you're right to say this to me. Yeah.
Well, let's just transition from there right into talking about the movie. Andres, first of all, I would love to know what your relationship is to this film, Che, and to Steven Soderbergh generally, if you have one.
I've heard about the film before. I remember vaguely when it came out. I think I saw Motorcycle Diaries, which obviously not made by him, but, you know, I saw Motorcycle Diaries when I was a teenager in theaters. I really enjoyed it. I remember this came out. I remember, like, I didn't get around to seeing it, and then people would mention it over the years, and I just never got around to it. And, I mean, you know, not spoilers, but pleasantly surprised. I
mean, it is surprising how little this movie is anti-Che, which it could easily be.
Also, no hand holding. This guy does not hold your hand in this movie. You don't know who the fuck this person is? Fuck you.
Right.
That's your mistake.
Exactly.
Yeah, read a book.
Are you familiar with other Soderbergh stuff? Ocean's 11, any of that stuff? Magic Mike, you know?
No.
Okay.
Wait. He did Ocean's 11?
Yeah, he did the Ocean's films.
All of them. Wow. This is kind of a very different movie.
Sure.
Yeah. His whole thing is like, the guy loves to zag, and this was literally like the film he released prior to this was Ocean's 13, which is and so he's all over the place.
I'm going to make an argument later, guys. I'm saying there's not zero connections between the Ocean's film and specifically Che Part 1. I think there's some overlaps.
There's plenty of overlap. Yeah, and I don't know if you guys saw when George Clooney was recently on Broadway and he had his hair dyed jet black, he did look very Cuban.
Sure.
So there's something.
Heard people say this. Yeah.
It's not my observation. It's not. I'm repeating someone else's mildly racist observation.
What's it called? It sounds like he's doing the whole like one for me, one for them, one for me.
That is very much part of his calculation. Definitely,
he is. Yeah, and then sometimes he'll accidentally do several for him without me. He'll try to do some for them. Big trouble
and almost not work in Hollywood anymore. And
this is one of those times. Too.
I saw this movie, did not do well in the box office.
No. Shockingly, the 4.5 hour Spanish language. Documentary about, or like, you know, docudrama about a guy who the most people who know about him in the United States hate him still and wish they could kill him again.
Part of my experience with this is just how naive I was to how far people feel from this type of film. Like, the people talk about it as if it's like, I don't know, watching like an 8-hour European epic in black and white with no sound or something.
Yeah,
like, it's
it has guns.
And it has guns and Benicio del Toro and like a very famous guy in it.
And Soderbergh, you know, he was committed to history, but certainly comfortable making everybody much more handsome than they were in real life. This is all like a lot of nice looking people with mud and rifles.
Except for Benicio del Toro, who is somehow less handsome than Che, even though he is quite handsome.
Isn't that so
fascinating?
Shocking? Yeah, I had the same exact
That happens every once in a while,
thought.
where someone is like a historical figure is so remarkably good looking that even captivating that even the famous actor is somehow less of a screen presence than the real guy.
Yeah. There's a moment we'll get to, of course, where Che has shaved his head in order to cross a border and like sort of purposefully made himself ugly. And looking at the real photos, he was still kind of handsome, even when he like made himself look like a dumpy middle-aged Uruguayan academic.
I had to turn to my girlfriend at that point because I've been reading the Anderson biography and seen the actual passport photo, and I turned to her and was like, it really is that crazy looking. Like it's true. It looks exactly as silly in real life as it does in the movie. I have a question, Andres, as a historian.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like movies that are about your chosen subject matter, or would you rather watch,
Star Wars,
Tron? Something totally not going to bug you with all its little inaccuracies. Exactly. Do you like movies about Cuba? Do you avoid them?
That's a good question. So I do like a good Cuba film, like a well done film. I also realize there's a lot of movies that I'm not the main audience. They're made for like there was like the Hannah Arendt biopic that came out like a decade ago, where like they have in the first 5 minutes someone turns to the camera and does like an exposition. Hannah Arendt, one of the most important philosophers of our time. So for people who knew nothing, and it's so like there's those kinds of films which I hate. But there's a lot of good films, and there's a lot of actually great Cuban films made in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
So I do enjoy it when it's done well. A lot of stuff out there is not. I actually went into this worried that it was going to be kind of like romantic slop, like romanticizing everything, and I was pleasantly surprised that it was not.
Yes, if anything, I think a little more romanticism might have helped audiences and the bottom line
just money
of this
wise.
film.
That might be true.
Of course.
Yeah.
There is the Che film, the Richard Fleischer film from 1969 with Omar Sharif as Che and Jack Palance as Fidel Castro. With music by Lalo Schifrin, of course, a favorite of this show. Argentine himself. But that movie is apparently I haven't seen it, but it's apparently the kind of romantic slop. It's in the 1978 film, The 50 Worst Films of All Time, which it was 78. They hadn't made a lot of bad movies yet, but it's considered quite bad. So I skipped it here. But I was pleasantly surprised by this. Let's get into it. Let's jump in here. There's a couple.
Sorry, he has a question about Jack Palance.
Before we do, Omar Sharif as Che may be like a rare case of whiteface, because Omar Sharif is not white, but Che very much was. So I'm very confused by the casting.
I mean, Sharif, I think, was kind of the Oscar Isaac of his day, where he's like, this guy is so handsome and ethnically ambiguous that white audiences will watch him. So we can put him in anything. Same. Anthony Quinn had a similar trajectory where
that's exactly right.
Yeah,
but he could be Italian or whatever.
And Palance, I think, was like Ukrainian. Jack Palance's real name is like 100 letters long or something, if I recall correctly. He's from like a Central Asian, ethnic group that no longer exists or something.
Don't get me wrong. Sharif is very much could play a stereotypical Cuban, just not Che Guevara, who is Spanish and Irish.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Che's dad, didn't Che's dad live in the States a little bit when he was a young man, or they had family in the States, which I was surprised by. From the Anderson biography. Let's talk about the movie. So I think we have a couple jobs here. I think we should provide some of the context that the film does not, because we love to provide our listeners with context. I think also talk about what it means that Steven Soderbergh, of all people, made this movie and made it when he did. And then, I think Ian and I both would love to take advantage of the attention of a historian of Cuba to ask some of our just general Cuba questions, if you're down for that, Andres. So let's launch in here. This is we're talking about the film Che. I don't know if listeners have picked up on that.
Yes.
This was released December 12th, 2008, directed by Steven Soderbergh, written by Peter Buckman and Benjamin A. Vanderveen. We're doing one episode on it because the film, well, it was released in two parts. They, I think, can't exist without one another. It played as a roadshow, like a 4.5-hour roadshow version. Premiered at Cannes as one film. I mean, it's one movie.
This is the rare film where the director talks about it being like intentionally dialectical information. So, I mean, these are two films that exist only in relation to each other. Like exactly. There's no reason to talk about them totally independently. Yeah.
And I think also some of the reason that it is so long is a kind of intentional,
very much so.
Endurance challenge, a duration experience,
particularly the second
puts
film.
you into the mind of the protagonist. Yeah. So premiered at Cannes, where Benicio del Toro won Best Actor. The jury president that year, just out of curiosity, I looked it up, was Sean Penn. The palm went to Laurent Cante's The Class, which is a movie basically like a white teacher in Paris wins the hearts of a bunch of multi-ethnic
This is like
students.
Stand and Deliver for Paris.
Yeah, but in 2008.
That's really interesting.
The Palme d'Or did not go to, just for example, Jajanka's 24 City, Clint Eastwood's Changeling, Lucrecia Martel's The Headless Woman.
Wow. Yeah.
A great Argentine film. Matteo Garone's Gomorrah. Charlie Kaufman's Synecdoche, New York.
Crazy,
these are some other films
that
are apparently worse than The Class, the film we all talk about every day. We like to do a little zeitgeist check-in, just to look at where we are in history when this film comes out.
What was happening? Yeah.
Not a lot. George W. Bush signed the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008 in October. That's the Wall Street bailout you may have heard of. Barack Obama is elected president of the United States. The country's second black president after Bill Clinton. 166 people are killed in the Mumbai attacks by members of the Pakistan-based Islamist militant group Lashkar-e-Taiba. And Bernie Madoff is turned in by his sons and arrested for securities fraud.
You know what? I don't know that I knew that. That's a brand new piece of information for me.
The sons? Yeah. That was new to me as well.
That's so interesting.
They were big Kira Sedgwick fans, and they couldn't stand anymore what their dad was doing to her. So that's what's going on.
Okay.
A little production context. The origin of the film is with Del Toro. And this is one of those films where an actor gets told that he looks like a famous person so much that he decides he needs to make a movie about it.
We've discussed this in the
Morgan
past.
Freeman with Invictus. Morgan Freeman really wanted to play Mandela.
Yep.
I have some other examples. Kevin Spacey was obsessed with Bobby Darin and made the awful movie Beyond the Sea. Where I think at one point Kevin Spacey plays like 17 when he's like
That's
50.
Really upsetting, yeah.
There's a James Franco movie where he played James Dean because everyone was like, this guy looks like James Dean. The Peter Dinklage, Hervé Villechaize movie, which was apparently pretty good. I don't know. But there's precedent for this.
There certainly is.
Del Toro and Steven Soderbergh both dated this woman named Laura Bickford, who is a producer.
Yes.
She produced Traffic with the two of them.
Yep.
So together they are already they're thinking about a Che movie before Traffic. They approached Christopher McQuarrie, the now the Mission Impossible guy, who had written The Usual Suspects with start Benicio, and he introduced them to this guy Peter Bookman, so McQuarrie and Bookman they wrote an Alexander the Great movie that was never made, that was going to be Scorsese directing Leonardo DiCaprio's Alexander the Great. Sounds good.
Yeah.
But he's like, I just wrote like a historical epic with this guy. You should talk to him. So Bookman writes something. They're talking about it with Soderbergh on the set of Traffic. Soderbergh's interested as a producer. And at some point they realized that Terrence Malick was the director of The Thin Red Line, the director of
and that he had been working in Bolivia for a while.
Yeah,
so he has
as a photojournalist.
Direct personal connection,
Yeah, he was covering the trial of Régis Debray for the New Yorker in 1967 or whatever. So he's interested. He's developing it. He's going to just make the Bolivia part, in Bolivia, do the whole Terrence Malick thing.
And at this point in the production, it's still mostly drawing from the John Lee Anderson biography.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
which I think was originally optioned by Brett Ratner, I learned.
Okay, I didn't see that. Interesting.
Brett Ratner,
Rush Hour
fame. You may know him as the Rush Hour director.
Did he do that? Yeah.
Who's been multiply accused of sexual misconduct and now lives in Tel Aviv.
Yeah,
it's weird how that keeps happening.
I was going to say the isn't he the sex pest who did the X-Men movie?
Yes.
He is the sex pest who did X-Men, The Last Stand. Yes. He's also the sex pest who did, I believe he did Tower Heist.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yep.
Which is a sort of Ocean's 11 take that was originally called Trump Heist and was going to actually star Donald Trump as himself. We got to cover that. We got to do that on Patreon.
Yeah.
Andres, let us know if you want to come back for Tower Heist.
Would never insult your intelligence.
Well, everybody needs a break.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Soderbergh, so as often happens with big, complicated historical epics, financing falls apart. Terrence Malick dips out.
The rights lapse also, right? So they lose the rights. Yeah.
I believe so. Mm-hmm. And then Terrence Malick goes and does The New World, which is his Pocahontas, John Smith, Jamestown movie.
Yes.
And that comes out in 2005. At this point, Soderbergh decides to direct, which is very interesting. It's an interesting way for someone to come onto a movie of this size and ambition and
sort of like
political,
exactly,
spiciness. Let's say.
Mm-hmm.
He comes on to he says in interviews later, sometimes you say yes and you're not sure why you said yes. Which is fine.
I think it is fine. And I part of me does wonder. I think it's really important that you mentioned this Malick thing, because I do think part of him is like, can I do Malick? Can I do
of course
Thin Red Line?
Because he's always pushing himself. He's always trying to do something. He's trying to zag.
He begins his career, listeners know, but as like a small personal 90s, he makes Sex, Lies, and Videotape, this like, famously intimate indie sort of like alternative filmmaking, digital filmmaking, and then has swung all over the place. He's done Elmore Leonard, Clooney, genre adaptations, all this stuff. So yeah, I think this is another test for him.
It seems a little glib from our perspective, but I do think he and other Hollywood people, he's smarter than most of them, but I do think there is part of him that does think, well, I'm an iconoclast, just like Che.
I mean, we have to talk about that. We'll talk about how much he thinks he might be Che. Also,
he's the Che of his industry. So he comes on to direct what is initially called Guerra, which is just the Bolivian story. I'm going to go in and out of Spanish voice today because I feel insecure about my Spanish pronunciation. So listeners, I
think that's all right. That's healthy.
In advance.
Yeah, you can say
We're saying Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
But Soderbergh comes on to direct Guerra, which is going to be just the Bolivia story.
Mm-hmm.
And then he realizes there's no context for this. He wants to make the Cuba story. So initially there's a script that's like 160 pages long. That's going to be in English. 160 pages is almost twice the length of a usual script. But then he decides, well, I don't want to combine events. I don't want to depict anything that didn't happen. So we got to make this longer. We got to make this 2 movies. It's going to be in Spanish. So of course the American financing vanishes.
Yep.
And then they get financing from Spain as they make as much of the film in Spain as they can, which is fine. That happens. And so at that point, it becomes this kind of like movie without a country where they finance it by pre-selling the foreign distribution rights, and it's like it's not like it doesn't have a big studio behind it, which is why the film sort of feels like it escaped rather than was released.
We know Soderbergh has done since the beginning of his career. I mean, he spent a lot of time in the early episodes talking about his creative financing and sort of like mixing and matching of producers and sort of like early offshoots of studios that were experimenting with sort of like more artistic wings and slates and stuff. But this is a weird one where he's making a 4-hour film that is
4.5.
Yeah, 4.5 hour film that has a budget smaller than a single one of the Ocean's films. And it was shot
in a few days fewer than the first Ocean's film.
Exactly, 4 days fewer. Yeah, which is so crazy to imagine. Yeah.
And like he likes to, he prides himself on being quick and efficient and all the things you would want every director to try to be. But that's kind of crazy. And it seems like the experience did make him lose his mind a little bit. He talks about the Bond company saying, we basically, if it was anyone else doing this, we wouldn't insure this production. But like, because you have this reputation for getting shit done on time, on budget. We'll let you go nuts in the Spanish Highlands.
And it's a strange combination of very well researched, founded. I mean, the two screenwriters do a lot of work. Obviously, they're like talking directly with Anderson at times. And
Bickford and Del Toro went to Cuba annually for like 6 years.
He was meeting. I mean, Del Toro was meeting with a lot of the people depicted on screen, up to and including Fidel very briefly.
He apparently met Fidel at like a book fair or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's as much as actors, we sort of talked about Nick Nolte doing this, like making it a huge part of his life. I think it turned into this 5 or 7 year project for Del Toro where he wanted to do this. And then on set, maybe as a consequence of this, there's a lot of improvisation, which I also think is sort of surprising for a film that is like desperately scrabbling for budget and kind of being shot, against all odds, for people to be kind of making it up as they go along.
Another big part of the production that we'll maybe return to a little bit later is that this film was shot on the brand new Red camera.
It's true.
Which is a now a pretty ubiquitous digital camera, but this was an early digital cinema. Like Soderbergh got his hands on a prototype, really wanted to do it. And the camera was finished. Like they finished making the working camera like a week before production started. Wow. And so there were guys there's a very fascinating documentary on the Criterion Edition, which I think is also on YouTube, about there were a bunch of guys from the camera manufacturer on set. Like
in case anything went wrong or to teach them how to use it. Yeah.
They were cooling it with like fans and ice and stuff. And then it turns out that the temperature sensor was just like dislodged. So the camera wasn't
overheating,
but it was just telling them it was overheating. Yeah. And Soderbergh had to shake. He like every morning there would be dust accumulated between the lens and the sensor because they were in the mountains. And so he had like a special screwdriver that he would hit the top of the camera with to dislodge the dust. Spiders kept getting in. I mean, lots of crazy stuff. So we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But the whole thing was a real ordeal, and the people involved do everything but literally compare themselves to like the July 6th movement in the Sierra Maestra.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the plot. And then we'll maybe talk about what's not depicted.
Mm-hmm.
How's that sound?
That sounds great. Yeah.
Ian, you want to run through the plot real quick?
Sure. I'll do my best here. And you guys can jump in if you feel like I'm missing anything essential. It's a little bit tough, I think appealingly tough, because the film is jumping between 4 different timelines. Does that sound right? Maybe 5?
I think so.
So it opens on an interview between Lisa Howard and Che, and Oscar Isaac translating very recognizably. I think his voice comes in.
And Lisa Howard, played by Julia Ormond, who is the star of the miniseries Traffic, on which the film is
that's
based.
A great point.
Thank you. Not really. It's pretty irrelevant.
It's a point.
It's a point.
Yeah. So we get this interview from 1964 where Che has already sort of established post-revolution, reflecting on stuff. And then that sort of continues to be intercut throughout the course of part 1. But then we jump back to Mexico City in 1955. Where it seems like these guys have already met, but it's sort of the beginning of the crew, the sort of July 26th movement forming their plan to take the Granma yacht into Cuba. Again, we'll talk about what's elided here after we finish. But, Fidel is coming and sort of like getting people excited. And they're talking about what they want the revolution to look like, what's important to them, etc., how they're going to do this, how many guns they have. And then they take the boat over. And then I think it's around this time they introduce this like third timeline, which is Che's very famous address to the UN General Assembly, also I think in 64, where there's sort of like process of him getting there. They don't have the speech yet, but, again, sort of post-revolution is present throughout the film, including from the beginning. And then we cut back to Che and his squad in the jungle in the early days of the revolution, sort of like taking the first barracks. the kind of discipline he was trying to impose, somewhat interfactional conflicts between the July 26th movement and other either anti-Batista or sometimes explicitly communist, sometimes not, groups, and the sort of beginnings of the campaign in the Sierra Maestra on the east side of Cuba, where they're sort of, making a name for themselves as Batista kind of it pretends that they don't exist or it's not a problem. And that, I think, is the bulk of the film is following from there as they recruit peasants and they try to figure out what type of group they are. And Che's telling people to do homework and you have to know how to read, because if you don't know how to read, you're, an ignorant populace is easily deceived and stuff. And so he's sort of becoming the ideal, as it were, of what type of revolutionary he is. And we have this big cast of characters. I'm sure we'll try to cover some of them, although probably not all, because, the famous people, both those who arrived on the ground and the people who sort of were recruited in the process of this, Almeida and Camilo and stuff, and these guys who led other columns as they worked their way across Cuba. And that part of the story basically comes to a head in the Battle of Santa Clara, which was the last place they were going to take before La Habana. And we don't even see the stuff that happens after. The conclusion of the film is basically they have this protracted battle, still fighting sort of uphill odds, outnumbered in Santa Clara. And again, throughout this, we're still cutting to Che in New York, talking about what the revolution means, what revolutionaries need to be true revolutionaries, et cetera, et cetera.
Also, being a revolutionary guy in a hotel room.
Exactly.
Sort of his relation to PR and to
there's little
being
moments
a public
of
figure.
Him deciding whether he wants to have makeup on for his TV interview and stuff. And
some powder.
Exactly. Maybe a little bit of powder. Yeah. And I think you're right to say that, Jay, because also it's identifying his relationship to his men at different points, sort of is he paternal? Is he potentially condescending? Is he maybe more than other revolutionaries interested in education and independence for these people, sort of maybe not individualistic autonomy, but sort of the belief that all these people, they're not faceless soldiers. They should be people who understand the revolution or whatever.
And Dr. Che, we get a little Dr. Che as well.
We get some doctor stuff as well. Yeah, although as Sean Lee Anderson says, the moment that he decided to pick up bullets in an early battle instead of his medic kit, he decided his fate for the rest of his life. There's some nonsense like that in the biography, but I think that's most of part one. Anything you guys feel is essential to mention here? I sort of elided some of the romance and the other things, but
no, I mean, I think I think you did. You pretty much nailed it. It really is. It's hard to know, because the Anderson book is so fresh in my mind. I was trying to make sure that I was noting what isn't actually in the movie, what I'm bringing.
Yeah.
Because so much of it is you're just meeting, he's going, oh, hey, Camilo, how are you? And that's all we learn about Camilo Cienfuegos, who was a huge sort of part of the command structure of the rebel army. You don't really get unless you know who Celia Sanchez is, you don't really know what this woman is doing there, except that she's one of the team.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Andres, thoughts on part one and plot wise and what is and isn't included?
Yeah, I really appreciate one inclusion, which is they make repeated references to the Llano. Llano literally means plains, but it's basically the urban guerrilla war. Because while it's kind of famous in American cinema because of the grenade scene in Godfather Part 2, right?
Right.
In Cuba, there's been a lot of friction over the years between how it's the rural guerrilla war is depicted as the main stage and the urban guerrilla war is kind of pushed off to the side, and part of that, and they refer to it in the movie, the urban leadership is murdered. They're tortured and killed. There's even an episode they don't talk about where like the entire the team that organized the attack on Batista's palace is found by someone who was a communist youth member. He gave that information to Batista's cops, and then they machine gunned the leadership of the Directorio, which is the Directorio is referred to, but we don't get into that. The other thing
this is like Frank Pais. There's some references, right, to like where the funding is coming from at the beginning, right? Very obliquely, right? This is some of the stuff you're talking about. Yeah.
One thing I learned from the John Lee Anderson book, Che, A Revolutionary Life, which is very researched, but also very readable. And obviously, it's not, John Lee Anderson is not trying to make you a communist by the end of the book by any means. But I if anyone is interested in detail, there's just a ton of context and detail in this book. Andres, I'm very interested in your thoughts on it. But what I learned is that there were a lot of people who wanted to be Fidel Castro, basically. There were a bunch of people who were like, Cuba needs a revolution, we need to get rid of Batista. There are people on the whole spectrum of ways to do that electorally, with some sabotage, full-scale war.
General strikes, as they mentioned in the film. Strikes. Yeah.
And so Fidel is, he starts, he takes the Moncada barracks early in the 50s, and like, which is a sort of
he tries to.
An early...
he tries. Yes. Yeah. That's exactly right.
But he does an early, like, these guys are fighting Batista. He gets arrested. He makes, as Ian mentioned once to me in conversation, it's crazy. This guy basically made a speech so charismatic they let him out of jail.
The history will absolve me speech. Yeah.
But and then he's in Mexico in exile, basically just like announcing, I am going to do an overthrow of Batista. I'm going to do the Cuban Revolution. So it's in people's minds. There are other people who they're saying, I'm going to do the Cuban Revolution. But for much of the process, Fidel is one of several people working together toward a goal that they're all sort of privately hoping they're going to become the leaders of. And so like the Directorio is one of these groups. There's the communists who are initially Fidel is just like strategically collaborating with them, but like trying not to let on that he's doing that, because initially the US they're sort of betting on both horses, and like there's some US support to the rebels or like overtures at least. So a lot of this context is lost, but like these are the people in the Llano, for example, are like rivals toward the same cause, rivals and also allies to the rebels.
And Andres, you felt like there was like an illustrative incident here that sort of like brought some of that stuff in, or what made you mention it?
Well, no. So, like the Llano, the fact that they included the Llano was a plus for me. But like in terms of like the PSP, which is the Partido Socialista Popular, which is the rebranded Cuban Communist Party, it's the same thing. They just changed the name. There's the fact that the film ends in 59. Well, it begins in 56 and then ends in like not even in 59. The very tail end. Well, actually,
December 58, I think, maybe, or maybe it is January.
I think it stops at January 2nd of 59. Yeah. They're still on their way to Havana, because I think they only arrive in Havana on the 10th. That's
right.
It actually avoids one of the more interesting things about the relationship with the Communist Party, which is they were Stalinists. They mentioned this in the film, the PSP are Stalinists, but they also did not like Fidel Castro. Like Raul had been a youth communist member, but when Fidel and his brother and the others tried to take the Moncada barracks, they're called bourgeois adventurist pushes. So that's a direct comparison to Hitler. They're comparing it to the beer ball push. And the PSP had a very complicated relationship to Batista. They'd worked with him. It's kind of beyond the scope of this podcast. They collaborated with him in the early 1940s. You'll have some old posters you can find online where it says, "Communists say vote Batista, 1940."
Wow.
Which is surreal. But so that kind of... and then Fidel spends the first decade of the revolution periodically purging the PSP of people who are too pro-Moscow and not loyal enough. So there's he has his communists, but even among communists, there's a lot of really strong divisions, and we don't really explore that because we have the time jump between movies.
And he had some resentment specific. I mean, not only because he was like first and foremost a nationalist, and then I mean, at least some people say, and then sort of like came around to socialism, maybe because of Raúl or because of Che or whatever. But he also had specific resentment because the Soviets had basically tried to say, like, we don't support armed struggle as the primary path, right? Isn't that? So he sort of like felt like this was like an obstacle to us getting what we wanted initially, although obviously they form a relationship later for decades and decades. But
yeah, there's a lot of distrust.
yeah.
Right. The sense that I get is that, you know, the American public school, high school history version of it is kind of like Cuba was a little country that had a revolution that was basically a project of the Soviet Union to get a foothold in the Americas. But when you learn about this, it's much more a project of these people in Cuba. Mm-hmm. Like Cubans want to overthrow Batista and this enormous regime of corruption, and basically just selling the island's resources and labor as something to be extracted for the U.S. Most of the island's land is owned by a few U.S. companies, the United Fruit Company and others. And people are living in abject misery. Havana is like the Las Vegas of the Caribbean. It's full of vice and like a playground for U.S. mafia guys. And so this revolution is very much homegrown, and then the alliance with the Soviets, or the interactions with the Soviets are much more strategic and vexed, and there's a lot of back and forth about like what the Cubans will and will not agree to. And so the idea we grow up in the States learning that this is basically just like a puppet regime when it's very much its own thing, negotiating with the world
superpowers that were relevant at the time
that all want something from Cuba, you know. Andres, I'm curious what you think of the Anderson biography. Have you read John Lee Anderson's book?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this? What do you think about this guy as from your own perspective as a historian?
I think
he is rude or polite as you like, by the way.
Yeah.
No. I mean, like he's been nice to me. He found me like asking if he was related to Benedict Anderson, and who's a very famous Marxist scholar, and then Perry Anderson.
Imagined Communities, right?
You know, he seemed very leftist, and sort of like, oh, maybe they're related. It's like, no, they're a very common name, but he was very kind to me. Anyway, so to my understanding, the book is still considered pretty positively in academic circles. Like, there's a lot of biographies that are written for a general audience, and then they come out and they're very celebrated, and then academics are pulling their hair out. But that is not the case here. In fact, I am pretty sure that it's been a few years since I read it, but isn't this the research that went into this book part of how they found Che's remains? Am I remembering correctly?
That's correct. Yeah.
Right. He helped to find, because Che's remains were basically dumped and hidden in Bolivia. And the book opens, the biography opens with sort of the process of finding and repatriating Che's remains.
And under an airport asphalt runway, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Like they really tried to just humiliate and vanish this man's remains from the earth.
Yeah.
An interesting thing I learned that the process of researching the movie also unearthed some new research. One of the researchers got some like CIA documents declassified, and that's where the scene in part 2, which we'll describe shortly, but the scene in part 2 where the U.S. representatives are talking to Barrientos, the president of Bolivia, and like talking about training. Some of that is like dialogue from a declassified CIA document that the film's researchers found. The story that ends the first film, where Rogelio, the sort of the young protege, or the young guy that they bring in the mountains when he's driving the fancy car, and Che
scolds him.
Ever the ideologue, even in victory, is like, we're not driving to Havana in a stolen car. Yeah. Like, take that back, and you're either you're getting a bus, a jeep, or you're walking. Mm-hmm. And Soderbergh loved that story, but that came from like an interview with somebody who knew Che. Rogelio, incidentally, for this podcast, is played by Victor Rasuk, who is in the very good Clint Eastwood film The Mule.
That's true. Yes,
he plays like Clint's daughter's husband or something, who introduces the mule to the world of drug mule. Yeah. So the film, like, you know, they were doing research. They contributed at least in small part to the body of research.
Yeah, we should say. I mean, it was drawing a lot from the Anderson, although on screen,
he's a chief consultant.
Yeah. Although on screen, they attribute they say based on reminiscences of the Cuban Revolutionary War for the first part, and then the Bolivian Diaries for the second part. Yeah. I also think that there were some elements. I tried to read pieces of the Taibo biography, also of Che, Mexican author, and it seemed like that, like the photograph, which is mentioned briefly in the Anderson, the photograph in Bolivia, the like initial photograph, gets a lot of discussion in the Taibo. I think it seemed like it just seemed like they were doing like a wide collection of research, which I think is just to the film's credit. But I do want to ask, before we engage further on like missing context, I think we've gotten a little bit of it, but I do have more questions. But I am curious, Andres, what you think about the movie as a like narrative, basically setting aside sort of like whether we feel like it's engaging authentically in the history. What do you think of it as a story? Like, what does it feel like the movie is interested in for you? Like, which elements of the Che mythos, or like what does it seem like the focus is in its way of unfolding this narrative in your mind?
That's a great question.
I say this as someone who is not a film scholar, so you guys have more expertise in this domain than I do. But I don't know. I liked a lot about the film because I feel like it would have been really easy to make even a historically accurate but still hyper romanticized film, and this is gritty in ways that I think are helpful to understand. It also doesn't shy away from like Che could be draconian with indisciplines and things like that. And I think that's part of why there's a missed opportunity to go into his role in the mass executions of La Cabaña after 1959.
Right.
But
that is no. I think we have to talk about that.
We'll get to it later. But just the key thing is, I do appreciate that approach. I think the time jumping thing works. I think that the biggest problem I have is that the second part just feels like a completely different movie because it doesn't have a lot of the same elements as the first half. And then because there's the premise that the second half is coming, you don't really get that arc that you would normally expect in a movie.
Right.
In the same way. And so it just doesn't, like,
there's
if you're just looking at it as part
in the
one,
first half.
Part one like just considered in and of itself, just feels like it feels like it stops mid-note, like stops mid-paragraph.
It does. I mean, I think partly intentionally, I think Soderbergh, he talks about trying to avoid the most obvious biopic stuff. His example is like, I didn't want a scene where someone says, "Why do they call you Che?" or whatever. He helpfully elides the Anderson anecdote where Che, like the baby Dalai Lama, picks the bullets instead of his Metapack or whatever. Right. I said Metapack like a video game. God damn it. I've picked one of the two. Che is driving his little cart, and there's a bunch of spinning question mark boxes, and he picks the one with the bullets in it. And Soderbergh also talks a lot about the sort of difference in visual language between the two films. There's different aspect ratios. The first one is an extremely wide frame, and he was talking a lot about John Sturges, the Hollywood, like sort of classic Hollywood director of like The Great Escape. And so he's talking about using this wide frame and giving it sort of a classic Hollywood feel, and it is a story. It's a story of victory. And he also talks about trying to compare or trying to draw from the style of the two different Che diaries, essentially, because the first one is written with the context of we won. This is and looking back at what happened, and so it's got more of a structured, literally like the camera's on tripods. A structured look. And then the second part is based on this diary that was published posthumously, obviously, and is literally like, it's a man who doesn't know the ending. And so the frame is narrower and in a kind of claustrophobic way. the color grade is different, so it's like bluer and sort of.
It's also like low contrast, so everything's kind of flattened out in the second one.
It's very handheld. Yes. The camera's shaking a lot, and so he's trying to he wants to put the audience in the mind of someone who is disoriented and doesn't know how this is going to end and is maybe feeling like it's not going to end well.
And the first part has like lush color, so not to say that it's like
green,
positive,
green,
but like when they're in the mountains, you really sort of get this like overwhelming sense of life, like the fullness of this world, the intensity of the violence in sort of a bright dramatic way, but also just like the landscape. And of course there's a sort of famous discussion of him trying to shoot unlike a traditional biopic, like Che in relation to these other people, so he tried to stay away from like really tight close-ups and stuff, because he said, I think, semi-jokingly, but like, this is about a socialist guy, and that means that you always have to be putting him in like a collectivist context, right? It's not about him as a standalone man, even though, of course, the film is most interested in him. But I think...
Right.
Yeah.
They shot in, and it's literally like the Cuba stuff is shot in Puerto Rico and Mexico.
Yes. For
the jungle, for the lushness.
Yep.
And then the Bolivia stuff is shot in Spain for the dust and the altitude and the mountains. And they recreated, they like painstakingly recreated La Higuera, the town where Che is ultimately captured and executed. Executed. Like they showed the research footage when they're in Bolivia in the town, and I thought, holy shit, they actually shot there. And it turns out, no, they just got a bunch of Spanish money and had a production designer fully recreate this town on a mountain in Spain.
The rich tradition of doing stuff in Spain is like it's cheap enough to be able to recreate an entire city or something.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Sergio Leone doing the same thing, but pretty incredible stuff, and also sort of from a research perspective, like kind of fascinating that to be able to like recreate the town.
Well, and also, we could even say recreate the town in it's like colonial ancestors' place of origin. I do want to say, to your point, Andres, I actually think I like the film, the climax of it not being a sort of historical climax, right? Denying us the Batista fleeing to the Dominican Republic, or like them being in
we
Lebanon
can just
or something.
cut to Godfather too.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want that.
We kind of can. But I think I sort of appreciated that if there is like you're saying, it lacks a traditional emotional arc, but if there is an emotional arc, to me, it is him figuring out or feeling like he has not finalized, but like reached a mature stage of his revolutionary idea of himself and like the type of the sort of model that he thinks is going to be able to be exported, whatever, the FOCO method or something. And I think like you're saying, of course, it still only exists in relation to the second film, but I think it is in some ways an important setup emotionally, because I feel like I, as an audience member, am brought along and thinking like, yeah, I would also be convinced that this works, right?
This could be done again. Yeah.
At the end of this story, obviously, like you're saying, in some ways, I want to talk about the period, the sort of like revolutionary development period that totally gets skipped, where in some ways I actually think Che realized that he didn't understand a lot of stuff and like ends up apologizing for economic mistakes and things like that. So it's not like he's like this totally cemented 100% confident person from then on out. But I do think that the first film ends on sort of, recognition, like you can train people in the jungle, you can bring along the populace, whether we don't really see the like radio campaigns and stuff, right, that were a big piece of this.
Right.
But again, for me, it's like, I don't think it's idealizing it necessarily. And in some ways, I mentioned earlier, but I was shocked to see the sort of low level of engagement in terms of like audience members basically were so upset. I sent Jake a specific screening in New York where Soderbergh I think he's already shown the film, and basically all people are doing while he's trying to explain like what he was trying to do with the movie, and I think a pretty reasonable fashion, which is just to say like, here are the things that Che did, and here's why I think he did them. And that's sort of unrelated to like a moral judgment. While he's trying to say this, there's just people in the audience shouting like, he was a murderer, don't make movies about him or something. So
literally screaming,
He's a murderer. Okay, fine. My point is, hold on a second. This is my point.
I think it's to this film's credit of, even if I think it's also missing things, I think there's such a low rhetorical bar in terms of like what most people even just know about his life that I think I was almost harsher on the film the first time I saw it because I think I wanted it to be this like comprehensive historical text. And now I think I'm more sympathetic because I think this is like a huge step up from just like the average consciousness level. I don't know if that's
imagine the Brett Ratner version.
Exactly. Yeah.
Starring, I mean, he probably knows Benicio del Toro, but you know, it would be very bad. Should we go to part 2, or should we talk about the years in between that the film skips over?
I don't know. I think I want to hear about. I want to discuss the stuff in between, and I think that will give some interesting sort of like missing context for. Yeah,
Soderbergh calls them the years behind the desk that he wanted to skip, and he talks about there's 100 movies you can make about Che.
Yeah,
but then notably before the film was like fully released, he said, if it makes $100 million, maybe I'll make a film about the Congo, which like. That's an interesting place to go next, as opposed to.
Yeah.
So Andres, what I love like kind of from your perspective, the major Che moments.
The semi-Nuremberg trials, the Minister of Industry. Can you give people like a little summary?
Yeah. So basically, between 1959, a lot of things happen at once. We obviously don't have time to get into all of them, but he's famously one of the key people in charge of the Cabaña Fortress, which is this massive colonial fortress that oversees Havana, and that's where a lot of Batista people were detained. I'll give the official explanation for why they did this. After 1959, when the rebels come to power, they start rounding up high-level Batista officials or people who are complicit in one way or another in the dictatorship. And again, this is a dictatorship that's like famously after the Moncada barracks attack. One of the guerrillas was Aide Santa Maria, and they showed her boyfriend's testicles on a plate and her brother's eyeballs, which they had extracted. And she apparently never got over that, but understandably, right? Like this is a very good regime. And so like the official excuse was they wanted rapid, like it's on show trial, really, but justice organized, institutionalized so that you don't have a repeat of what had happened in the first revolution, or the first big revolution of the 20th century in Cuba, which is the 1933 revolution, where regime supporters were dragged from their homes and beaten to death by randos, right? So mob justice. And so they wanted something a little more institutionalized. There is some evidence, but also the conclusions of the trial pretty clear in advance, right? And this causes a lot of flack to happen.
But they try to set up this like, whether it's maybe artifice, you can, I'm sure, say better than I can. But, they claimed they were copying the Nuremberg trials, and they sort of had like two tribunals, like a military and a civilian one or something, that would like both give judgments. And then Che was giving sort of like final approval, basically, or something, or like signing off on decisions. Is that like a fair characterization?
I haven't done like a deep dive on his role in the trials. I'm not sure if actually someone has done like a deep archival job, because I'm also not sure to what extent those archives are open. Which is another question, because then you would get it, because if you open the archives, you're also not just saying Che, who's been dead for decades, and his political memory and stuff, but also maybe the people who were in the firing squads are alive, and then
they don't want to be exposed. It
might be a problem or a question for 20 years from now or something.
So they institutionalize it. I think that they basically I think a lot of this was more about getting it out of the way as fast as possible in order to also give people a very clear win, which would legitimize the revolution as different from the ones before. I think that's the very clear political calculus behind it. And moral judgments aside, I think it did work for the time.
Yeah, we did talk about, Soderbergh made the movie The Good German, which we talked about a few episodes ago, and on that episode we did talk about how much the Nuremberg trials did not work and how the Nazis won and are still in charge. So
But
the invocation of Nuremberg.
I know. Yeah,
you do think, well, this is a different way to do it.
Exactly. But there was kind of like a popular, I don't know if it was an official thing or like there's at least an anecdote of Fidel like shouting out to a crowd like, do you guys feel like justice has been done? And people shouting like, yes, we feel like justice has been done.
Yeah.
And there was some type of plebiscite vote or something where like 90% of people said like, we feel like this is like pretty good. So like to your point, Andres, is like just trying to sort of sate maybe this need for vengeance, if you want to call it that, or justice or whatever, and be able to start the building of...
Do you have numbers, Andres, rough numbers of how many people were executed at La Cabaña?
Not off the top of my head. I'm under the impression that we're talking about hundreds, not thousands or tens of thousands. This is not like a Stalinist purge where like
right.
This is much more like laser focused responses, and usually we're talking about people where this guy was the torturer, this guy was this, like they're not just like randos who are you stood guard here, we're gonna shoot you.
I mean, I think it's very telling, and I was actually quite surprised that Soderbergh, basically the only execution he depicts, he shows is like extraordinarily justified, or at least like a very reasonable. These few rebel soldiers who like defect, they run away. Basically, they pretend to be more in charge in order to steal and rape some peasants who are then murdered by the Batista army. So Che's like, look, you fucked up this way, this way, this way, this way. And then they're executed, which, like, the execution aspect of it, I guess you could argue that they maybe deserved a softer punishment. But, like, he does show an extraordinarily reasoned and, like, logical form of justice here. Yeah. To my mind, at least.
To me as well. And again, I don't think the film is trying to, like, again, make a moral judgment on this. But I do think it is kind of rejecting... this sort of like Butcher of La Cabaña identity as, I mean, I was reading, people online, and the sort of most rabid anti-Castro, like Cuban population of Florida and stuff, they will talk about him. I mean, they were trying to cite, there was like this chain of uncited sources about this idea that not only did he execute people at La Cabaña, but he enjoyed doing it. And somebody was like, well, how do you know that? And they just like tried to find articles that cited other articles that seemed to have no source of, I'm not trying to say I can speak to his state of mind when he was executing counter-revolutionaries or something, but there seems to be this sense that like, Che as murderer, the specific word that people use, seems to be grounded in the idea that like he enjoyed executing people. Although, again, whether you think that's true, I will say it somewhat goes against the record in the sense of like part of the way, at least my understanding, like they won the quote unquote propaganda campaign like during the revolution was by not executing people maybe as ruthlessly as Batista would, and sort of like showing, or at least, again, you can call this politicking or something, or like a, persuasion technique, but by trying to show like, if you want to come over to our side, like, you will be forgiven, or like we will treat you as like just the same, level of revolutionary as we are or something. So,
yeah. And meanwhile, any rebels who were captured or surrendered to Batista were, as the Anderson biography shows, pretty much always executed. Mm-hmm. Even if you laid down your arms, they would kill you. Yeah. As opposed to the way that the rebels treated people. And we talk about political violence on the show a lot. I've never been in charge of a country that's just undergone a revolution, so I don't know how I would behave in that situation. But it is frustrating to see people. Usually, and not always, but usually somebody in Miami who's like, these monsters took away my father's plantation, saying like, this guy is a murderer, when the United States is, of course, like one of the most brutal murder machines in the history of the world. We've talked about this. Yeah,
or even just to limit it to like mid-revolution being sort of a violent time historically, kind of across the board, right? It's like, not to say that it's a justifying... sort of like blanket response, but even in the film, Che says something to the effect of like this is revolutionary justice. We can't have a trial or like take you back to the city or like get you to a priest so that you can, get last rites. Yeah. But we're trying to do things in like a semi-official fashion. But it looked like, Andres, you wanted to add some context here.
Please.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I will say for the soldiers part, something that the film doesn't really get into is basically so I know there's a lot of battles in this movie, but really the guerrillas don't really defeat Batista's forces in a traditional sense. Mm-hmm. Really what we're talking about is a conscript army that is demoralized by years of being shot at because they're just like, well, what the fuck did I do? Right? Yeah. I'm also a peasant from wherever, and so you do have people coming in and giving up their guns and stuff, and even if they can't be trusted, they're usually treated like in a very, like, here are the rules, we're not going to deviate from those rules, you can, and so that is like what happens when the final part of the guerrilla war is happening. It's more the dissolution of the army due to demoralization rather than their full military defeat in the traditional sense. Like, I think that kind of hints at that with that one room full of officers and troops and cops that defect, that just surrenders en masse, but it still makes it look much more military. And Battle of Santa Clara, very important, but like it was much more the collapse of the army, which happened partly because Batista just would not let go of power. And the U.S. is like, come on, dude, just pass the baton and that'll diffuse a lot of the tension. And and he refuses to give up. So that's kind of a bit of context there.
Yeah. I think I read something similar also that, like, I mean, even in the film, maybe another reference to that is Jay mentioning something like, we just finished a war that had started like 100 years ago or 40 years ago or whatever, right? So sort of the sense like you're saying, it's not like they went and fought this incredible, strategic, traditional, like drawing maps warfare, Napoleon style or something moving across Europe, but rather capitalized and exacerbated and brought public awareness to the dissatisfaction at the same time that, like you're saying, I think a lot of the conventional reading is Batista kind of shooting himself in the foot of holding on to power and embezzling money and spending money on officials because he was really afraid of being cooed by his own sort of like, whatever second and third in command. So he was just constantly trying to like appease other people in his military structure, and sort of just like generally being distracted and not interested in just like going and stamping out these people in a way that might have been the most effective.
Also, he managed to alienate everybody.
Yeah.
So he's like, alienates, like, so the people in the poorest parts of Cuba have been, like, especially the East, which is the least developed part, have been an ever existing kind of base for resistance and uprisings and stuff. But he starts killing the people in the middle class too and torturing their sons. And so he alienates them. And then the rich actually don't really like him because he's not white. He's a mulatto. He's an up-jumped sergeant from the Sergeants' Revolt in 1933. Even in the 1950s, when he's dictator, he's not allowed to join the Havana Yacht Club because that's whites only.
Wow.
And so he creates his own yacht club, right? So, like, they'll work with him, but they're not, like, committed Batistianos. The committed Batistianos are, like, his buddies from the army who he's, raising up. And so this is an opportunity for them to grift. They didn't sign up for like this specific ideological project. They wanted to live the good life. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really feels like, and I think we should talk about part two, just time-wise here.
Sure. Yeah.
It really feels like Fidel is this sort of special sauce, like the charisma, the leadership quality of this guy who Anderson talks about when Che and his first wife Hilda first met Fidel. They asked him sort of like, why, what's going on in Cuba? And his answer lasted 4 hours. He's like he's a guy who can talk. He's a guy who can certainly just draw attention. It seems like Cuba is a a country where something definitely needs to happen, and you have sort of a guy who can draw people to him in Fidel, and a guy who is sort of a combination of small-time strongman and useful patsy for larger forces from the U.S. and from international business.
Yeah,
right?
that's something I was going to qualify to, make sure we're not engaging in too much like great man of history type stuff, is that it's, to me, maybe it's like he's the like special sauce, like the right straw on the right camel's back or something, right? The sort of accumulation of all these factors that crystallize in this group of people who come across.
You're right. And I mean, I think less than great man, like than an actual great man, I think he slots into a great man shaped hole in people's minds.
But like you're saying, and like Andres has been saying also, like a great man shaped hole that was like iterated a bunch of times, like up until this point, until maybe like this happened to be the right moment for this.
So Che wonders, though, is he the special sauce? And also, he's an Argentine. He's not Cuban.
Yeah.
He's been welcomed into Cuban society, obviously, as one of the key figures of the revolution, but he's got kind of an itch. He's a wanderer. He's a lifelong wanderer.
He's also messed up, like I said, just very briefly.
Yeah.
Economic planning pretty badly in a way that I think
probably
sours him.
He's a very well-read guy, but he's trained as an allergy doctor. Shout out to the allergy doctors out there. But he's not like a professional economist. And they win, and then suddenly they're like, well, I could put myself in charge of anything. And so he decides to leave Cuba and try doing the revolution thing elsewhere. Most notably, he goes to the Congo, and which he calls a failure at the beginning of his book about that experience, and it doesn't take. There's, I think, we could do a 10-hour series on why that doesn't happen. Speaking of which, for even further context, shout out to the Blowback podcast. Obviously, people listening to this know about Blowback, but they've done a lot of talk on Cuban history if you want to dive deeper.
Yeah, but he says, like, maybe it's lack of discipline. He also says, I think, in honest reflection, that maybe doesn't last long enough. He says, like, he didn't really understand the political landscape of the Congo that well, and, like, what the factors were. He also has this phrase, like, chantaje de cuerpo presente. Like, he's like, I kind of, like, showed up and made them start a rebellion because he's like, I'm here. I'm Che. You guys have to do a revolution now.
It's Che time. Yeah.
So,
and then
go ahead.
Does he do the same thing in Bolivia?
Well,
Is that?
I mean, part of the argument in the Lee Anderson book is like, he said that he regretted this thing, and then maybe he did almost an identical thing. And he even has like another secret failure in Argentina, which also kind of breaks his heart, where his like proteges die in this really horrible incident where he sort of says, like, they didn't follow my rules. My rules, like, keep moving, and they didn't keep moving. And so because he has this dream from the days of his motorcycle trip across Latin America of like basically liberating everybody. Yeah, like he says he's gonna like start a sort of Vietnam style chain reaction that's gonna liberate all of Latin America. Yeah,
that's why he went by Ernesto Che Guevara.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of like just the core ironies of his entire career that he became this expert on guerrilla warfare and revolution, and he fundamentally did not understand why the Cuban Revolution succeeded.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's he was one part of a machine that I think worked really well because of all of the constituent parts, not because of his techniques exclusively.
Right. Well, but also like so when the fight against Batista, Batista's a man without a country. Mm-hmm. His lieutenants are all there to grift. They're not there to fight for some glorious cause, right? And so when he tries to do it in a country where there isn't that almost universal hatred for this dictator and the universal agreement, the system does not work, it is rotten, it is illegitimate. When you go to another country, like, Bolivia just had its revolution in the 50s, there's not that consensus. And then, ironically, the one case where there is something like the Cuban level consensus it's Nicaragua in the late 1970s.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And it wasn't FOCO theory. It was just that everyone hated the samosas.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
So let's talk about part 2.
Yes.
So it begins November 1966. We see Fidel reading this. So Che goes missing. Che kind of vanishes from the public eye. And to the point that Fidel has to basically make an announcement. And so we see askew on an old television in a very Soderbergh, format fetishism way, which I appreciated. We see Demian Bashir as Fidel reading this letter that Fidel wrote to him that I think he wanted read in the event of his death, but basically saying like, I'm renouncing my Cubanness and turning my attention to the world's revolutionary struggle, in so many words. And we see him donning this silly, shaving his beard and his head to look like an old man, going to Uruguay, or like going to Bolivia disguised as an organization of American states, like representative from Uruguay, because he's a famous guy. Like, right. He's now famously the man who will show up and fuck up your country. So he has to disguise himself. And we see, with the days listed, we see him trying very hard to put together a revolution like the Cuban one in Bolivia and gathering men and trying and failing to, for example, get support from the Bolivian Communist Party led by this guy Mario Monge, who's played by Lou Diamond Phillips.
Not a traditional Latin American actor, but yeah.
No.
Sorry, keep going.
Also, Matt Damon's appearance is, of course, distracting.
Oh, actually, I disagree. I think that's good. It made me laugh. And also, he does do, like, there's a word that he says that is like a German trying to speak Spanish, that I have some German friends here in Mexico. They do kind of sound like that. So I didn't think it was terrible.
I take it back. Yeah. I take it back. I'm sure he learned from Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck taught him many, many tricks of the tongue, I'm sure. Yeah. So we see him, the kind of this a similar experience to the rebels in the Sierra Maestra, but like it just not taking. Tanya, his German-born Argentine sort of companion, revolutionary partner, played by Franca Potente here. We've previously talked about her because she was the namesake of one of the Symbionese Liberation Army kidnappers of Patty Hearst in the film Patty Hearst, which we covered. She's involved. We get cuts to René Barrientos, played by Joaquin de Almeida, the Portuguese actor, and his dealings with the CIA, with Americans who are like, we want to get this guy. We're going to send some people to train Bolivians to turn them into like counterinsurgents. And it's basically just like a steady kind of surrounding of and choking out of Che's army here. He's having a pretty severe asthma. The group gets separated into two parts. The locals, there's some informing by locals who at one point also think that they're cocaine smugglers. A brief cameo by Gaston Pauls, the Argentine actor who was in Nine Queens, which a film which Soderbergh wrote the U.S. Remake of. And then, at La Guerra, there's this great scene, which I think was the first scene that they shot in the whole film, is them in this ravine, the rebels in this ravine, while the Bolivian army appears over this ridge in a just awful, like the pit of your stomach feeling shot. It's like just more and more guys. Of death.
So, this like silhouetting on the horizon. And it is also, this to me is Thin Red Line Malick stuff, like the opening.
Very much. Yeah. And they just, they get pinned down, a bunch of people get killed. They go to this town like Guerra, and they're ambushed. There's airstrikes. They're clearly just like outgunned. Che is captured. We see him try to and almost succeed in working his magic on one of his guards, who then has to go like take a cold shower outside. Basically, like he tells the other guard, like, I can't talk to this guy anymore. It's your turn. Yeah. He's gonna make me free him. Yeah. Basically. But then we see the film shows it, the character's name is Alejandro Ramirez. He's played by Yul Vasquez, who's a character actor you've seen in a million things. He's based on Felix Rodriguez, who's this Cuban exile CIA guy who basically shows up and says, like, kill him.
Yeah.
And the order comes in from Barrientos to execute Che. There's a guy volunteers, and then we get a very fascinating sequence where we are given Che's perspective.
Very present style sequence here. Yeah.
Yes. So the camera is at Che's viewpoint. We hear the shots ring out and the camera sort of falls to the side, and that's fascinating. Particularly because we know that Soderbergh is often his own camera operator. Mm-hmm. He's his own cinematographer, but he's often the one holding the camera. So I imagine Soderbergh is the one
dropping to the dusty earth of this like Adobe home. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, his corpse is lashed to the skids of a helicopter and flown out. And then we cut back to the grandma, the yacht that the Cuban revolutionaries took from Mexico to Cuba back in 1956. And Che looks over at Fidel and Raul. And I wonder what you guys make of this final shot. Like, there's almost a sense of like maybe betrayal or like,
interesting,
loss. I mean, or maybe just like this was the missing ingredient.
Yeah, I was, I think it's a powerful shot. It was, I think, one of my favorite choices of the film. But I think to me, it's just like, I guess I was sort of imagining like in that moment it contained, because in the first film we get almost the exact same shot, but obviously it's in the context of the victory. But now I think it's just, to me, it's sort of like that moment contained like the future highs and lows of his life, right? Like this is sort of like, not like a inflection or like the inflection point, but a inflection point, because this would lead to the, change in the entire regime and the future of Cuba. It would also lead to his kind of like miserable and unsuccessful death. Yeah.
Yeah. It's powerful and painful. You also like it's specifically Fidel and Raul are like, they're looking at each other. Like Che is outside of this moment between them. I guess thoughts on part 2, Andres, in terms of what is and is not included. What was your reaction to this part?
Just you guys make me think about that ending shot, and it is more interesting now that I'm hearing you guys talking about it. And I wonder if it's also like maybe he's looking from the outside, and maybe the point is he doesn't understand why they succeeded. That's why it's like him looking and thinking, like trying to like emulate and understand, but he doesn't.
And intellectualize.
Raul is writing something too. There's like a sense of knowledge there that he doesn't have access to.
And if we're really doing close reading, Che is also peeling an orange that he then hands to another guy, which I thought was really nice. Of sort of like he's the ideologue. Like he's at every moment of his life, he's trying to like live his sort of fantasy moral structure of the world.
He's trying to. He peeled the Cuban orange and handed it to the people, and then left
or
to the next orange.
Death.
Ah, yeah, sure.
Like in The Godfather.
Yeah. Yes.
The oranges, perhaps. And Soderbergh is a big, he's a big cinephile.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of context.
Yes, please. Like how did this strike you, and what things should our listeners know about the Bolivian period?
So, like with the guerrilla campaign in the Sierra Maestra, like if you understand who the actors are, and they're sometimes just referred to by first names, or the places, like this is very well researched and very carefully done. You have Regis Debray, who he just kind of assumes people know is like a big deal. I do actually have a funny Regis Debray anecdote. So Norberto Fuentes was apparently a Cuban journalist. He says that while training in the Sierra Maestra to become a professional guerrilla in the early 1960s, Regis Debray was critiqued by his Cuban training officer because he kept shitting and then not picking up after himself in the Sierra Maestra, and so that would give away his position. And so he was told, quote, "Te van a matar por cagón. they're going to kill you for taking big shits.
For being like the shitter. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. So anyway,
this guy clearly doesn't have a cat.
That's great.
He hasn't learned. You got to cover it up.
Anecdote. Suddenly, our listeners understand being a guerrilla for the first time.
I mean, there's some incredible stuff in the Anderson biography where he talks about Che's just description of like revolutionary diarrhea. He talks about like, the like, I believe he refers to this one house where they are sheltered as like becoming an inferno of like black ingratitude of their intestines. So I think Che and I would have had at least something to talk about together.
But getting back to the more serious side, so there's an oblique reference, the 1950s Bolivian Revolution, where there were land reforms. This is a revolution where I am fascinated by it and want to learn more about it because this is one where like people threw, like miners threw dynamite. That was kind of like the symbol of the revolution, right? Yeah. And so it was a really big deal. Obviously, it was a very imperfect system that came out of that, but there were also a lot of achievements. And it's like kind of referred to in a throwaway line of, did you think that the peasants would support you? They've already had their reform. And then not addressed again for the rest of the film. And I think that is kind of a missed opportunity. And the other angle of it, very obliquely and very artistically done, is like the issue of the Indian. Because in Cuba, there's racial dynamics for sure, but it's white-black is predominantly the issue. There isn't like still existent native communities, many of which speak as their first language a native language, and also some speak a language. So there's Aymara and there's Quechua, and also the groups hate each other or have historically had beef. So you have all of this politics and language issues and cultural subtext, and also if you're a white person coming to all of this context, and that's part of why it fails. And he kind of gestures towards that, but he doesn't really like expand on it. He's clearly aware. Like, I don't think he just didn't know, but like maybe he didn't feel it was central to what he was trying to say, or maybe he didn't feel like he could do it artistically without like an Indian turning to the camera and going, this is the sociocultural context.
And there wasn't a moment in the research where someone happened to give a speech explaining all of this, you know? I mean, it's obviously kind of impossible for us to say because we're all bought in and we're interested enough to read many pages about this. But I am very curious if anyone who kind of knows about Che and like is maybe sympathetic toward the aims of the revolution, if they would watch this movie and come away thinking, I want to learn who all these people are, or if they would, like, is this a springboard, or is this like this seems really complicated, like, this is wasted my time, you know? Like, I wonder how much this film operates as a I don't know, an amuse-bouche for a life of research on this revolution. I
mean, I think you're right in saying that the three of us are probably not the greatest test audience for that. Because I will say,
my girlfriend who is likes to read, likes history, likes Latin American history, found these films extremely boring.
Interesting.
We did watch them on a weeknight where she was tired, but she was like having trouble engaging, and she's the kind of person who will watch a movie and go research afterward if she feels like it. So
I mean, I think you correctly identified, Jake, the second film, just in terms of like capturing its tone and storytelling, is much less eventful, because I think like within the first 30 minutes we kind of already see where everything's going. Like the foreshadowing is so heavy, almost at every moment it's sort of like everything that works in Cuba is not working, right? And they openly discuss like, well, all of the politically activated people are in the mines in the north, and you guys are hanging out like in the woods where almost nobody lives. They have, you know, all these discussions of logistical problems and lack of discipline and all these things. And then, I mean, I rewatched the film, obviously, or the films for this discussion, and then went back just to get a sense of sort of like timing a third time. And at 50 minutes out of the 2 hour and 15 minute second part, we're basically already in the like end game of like they're looking for the other group. Like there's not even really any more like key events except for this Bolivian squad, backed by the CIA, hunting them down in this like specific ravine that you're talking about. So it's almost
it's a dread exercise.
Hour. Yeah, it is a dread exercise, and I think like you're saying, Andres, there's also like these big behind the scenes elements. I mean, we do get Lou Diamond Phillips as Mario Monge, who is the person that Che's second wife, like to the end of her life, blamed for his death because she saw him as like the key traitor figure or whatever. But in the Anderson biography, I think it's really interesting because Monge is not introduced in the mountains of Bolivia. He's introduced in the period when Che is a minister in Cuba and they're like planning the future. And he comes several times to Cuba to talk to Fidel. And there's like an interesting anecdote where I'll read just a tiny, tiny bit. He was there with another South American leader, and he says that this guy Claure, and he says he agreed that he and Monge made clear their opposition to a Cuban-sponsored guerrilla war in Bolivia, but he found Fidel non-committally diplomatic. Che was arrogant and dismissive. That's what the communists here told us when we wanted to make the Cuban Revolution. Che said if we'd listened to them, there wouldn't have been one. And then they sort of go on about this sense of pressure. And then there's discussions about something that doesn't come up in the film at all, which is like the Sino-Soviet split and this idea that Mario Monge was like extremely Soviet-backed. And Che sort of got a reputation as they called him like even like Raul Castro called him China's man in Cuba. So in this split, he was sort of more sympathetic to China's version of communism. And so there's sort of this like long lead up that, again, I don't know. I'm not saying the film necessarily had to cover this, but we get this like tiny glimpse. Like you're saying, Andres, it's in some ways I really respect it for being so austere because they're sort of like, you just have to like figure out from this context that these guys know each other. Monge's obviously a head of the Communist Party and that he's not backing Che, but we don't really understand like where this comes from. And we just sort of have to, as the audience members, figure out why this is like catastrophic, basically sort of saying like, in contrast to the Cuban environment where they figured out this accord and everybody, even if they disagreed, was like kind of working together in some capacities. Here they're straight up. There's that scene where Monge tells people like, if you stay here, you will lose your Communist Party like pension or whatever, like, salary. So like,
I can't pay you anymore. Yeah.
So like this, we are straight up telling you not to be here as much as we can. So
also there's a key bit of context here that's also like, I didn't appreciate that in the movie, they almost make it sound like Monge isn't supporting this because he's a coward. Really the context is that the Bolivian Communist Party had only recently been re-legalized after decades of clandestinity. And so it actually had the first opportunity to use this new context to actually convince people. And now they're going to be forced right back into clandestine activity. Also, like the Soviet line is the USSR is still like, they still have more women than men because so many men died in the Second World War. The country's still kind of not fully in ruins, but it's still not doing great. And so their position is, what is in our sphere is in our sphere, but what's not in our sphere, we're not going to stick our necks out because we have bigger fish to fry.
Right. They're not like so flush with people and resources and money that they can just do whatever they want. They're still like trying to keep people alive.
They don't even have area study centers yet.
Yeah.
They start to build area study centers at the end of the 1950s, and then they really accelerate it because they're like, oh fuck, we don't have a lot of Spanish speakers. So that's why some of the people who go as Spanish speakers to set up missiles during the Cuban Missile Crisis are not trained Soviet cadres because most don't speak Spanish, but actually some were Spanish Republican refugees who came to the USSR as children and then go to Cuba in the 1960s.
Interesting.
That's fascinating. I mean, there's a whole thing in the Anderson biography talking about Che seeing his father as like an Argentine supporter of the Spanish Republicans, and like the weird relationship between Argentina and the Nazis and the like Perón's sort of non-committal stance in World War II. I mean, there's obviously with anyone you can get You can keep digging. You can complicate and historicize ad infinitum. But like, it is fascinating how much Che was at the center of like the entire 20th century. Like, the man was sort of just like every major event you've ever heard of, every major political something or other, like, has some connection to this guy.
2 degrees of separation or something.
Yeah. Something I learned about Bolivia. There's a great short documentary from 1967 called End of a Revolution that was made like right after Che's execution. That's on the Criterion disc. I learned about Bolivia as this extraordinarily mineral rich country. I mean, I knew there were miners who threw dynamite. I didn't really know to what extent Bolivia is, like, in a lot of ways, the world's mine. It's got the largest lithium deposits in the world. Lithium, which of course is required for batteries in electronics, which you may have heard of as a big part of the economy. Yeah. They also have it's the 7th largest world producer of silver, 5th largest of tin and antimony, 7th largest producer of zinc, 8th of lead, tungsten, boron, gold. So like, this is a place that the entire world really wants to keep under its thumb, essentially. It's also, as we see in that great map sequence at the beginning of the film, it's like the center of South America. So if you're playing Risk and you want to take over South America, it seems like it would strategically as an interesting place to start. But like, there's all these other complicating factors and regions within Bolivia. The reasons why this is not maybe the ideal.
Although that was exactly
starting point.
Che's theory, right? I think in the Anderson, there's this quote where he says, like, I mean, it sounds obviously pretty harsh and utilitarian, but he's like, we may have to sacrifice Bolivia to start, because like it is the linchpin that will let us expand the fight into Argentina and Peru and all these other places. So I think it's go ahead.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's like once you sort of understand Marxism just on like at a very basic level, like understand that money and resources are behind the minds of people keeping things the way that they are. Like, it's such a, I'm just seeing the Matrix so much when you just see like, Bolivia is full of all of the stuff everybody needs to make Game Boy. And like, now I know why they're doing a coup there.
Right. Yeah.
I guess, do we want to talk more about the film? Do we want to maybe do some kind of, since these events, catch our listeners up on history in Cuba and Bolivia? Where do we want to go from here?
I'd like to do both, but I don't know, Andrés, where would you like to start?
Yeah,
open to whichever.
Well, let's talk about Cuba since the film. Obviously, that's it's an enormous topic.
Can you start just really quick? 60 years of Cuban history. Yeah.
I mean, look, I'd love to talk your ear off about all this, or really have you talk mine off about all this stuff. But just from a sort of a Che perspective, how much has this film, how much has Cuba, what's the trajectory been ideologically and sort of politically? Like, where are we now relative to 59?
Basically everything.
I'm sure that narrows it down.
So I would say that besides the healthcare and education, a lot of Che's, basically all Che's other big ideas don't really gain traction. So for example, he was one of the big figures behind this very voluntarist idea of how the economy should work. It should be based on moral incentives, not economic incentives.
Right.
He had this thing called trabajo voluntario, so voluntary work, but very quickly that became voluntary, in quotes. And even when I was there, people would openly joke, like people who were administering it, like not other people. Yeah. People would say, it's voluntary obligatory. Yeah. And so it became like a part of the criteria for people's work files to see if they could get good jobs and stuff. So
okay.
So that
not that we don't have work for free in the United States.
Sure.
It's a lot of internships. It's an evil across the world, I think.
Right, but it's state coercion at your job place, and then it goes into your permanent file if you didn't go. But anyway, but the key thing is that voluntarist phase in the 1960s, which kind of destroyed the economy because Fidel kept doing like experiments like that, that gets abandoned in the 1970s. And actually, like there's a recent book which I really strongly recommend by Radoslav Yordanov called Our Comrades in Havana, which is about Eastern Europe's relationship with Cuba and how like Raúl is going to all of these Eastern countries and at one point tells the Bulgarians, hey, the economy was bad in the 60s, and it's mostly our fault. We recognize that, but we're doing better. We're institutionalizing things now in the 1970s. So that gets institutionalized. Cuba is this hub of guerrilla expansionist stuff, much to the chagrin of the USSR, who's part of the reason that they're on their outs with the USSR by the end of the 1960s. But it starts to curtail that and be a bit more selective in the 1970s. Still pushes the envelope, like with Angola, right? But it tends to pick and choose much more carefully. And so the voluntarism, the guerrilla warfare, those kind of get phased out. And Cuba becomes, in the Cold War, more dependent than ever on sugar, which is another thing that Che said, absolutely we should not do. And
which he also admitted his mistake, right? But I think there's a famous line where he said, like, I think for me, sugar represented the like colonial past, and I didn't want us to be a dependent single commodity state. And obviously, I think there's
Cuba is like America's sugar bowl in a sense. It's like it's a resource colony.
Well, but ironically, it wasn't by the 1950s.
Interesting. Part. Yeah.
So everyone, your listeners are probably familiar with the sugar quota. So what's one of the big things? Cuba had a percentage of U.S. sugar, and when the U.S. cuts that off, that's kind of like the nadir. Like that's really the sign that Cuba and the U.S. are on the outs in 1960. I want to say. At the end of all the nationalizations. So it's like a tit for tat, and it escalates, and that's the peak. Well, the peak is the invasion, but but the key thing is by the 1950s. Sugar all around the world, countries started to exit from becoming sugar exporters. Look at the West Indies. Look at the British Caribbean, right? People don't really focus on sugar as a way to make money. They'll do either value-added goods like rum, or they'll do tourism. But most countries were exiting. The sugar quota was a way to give Cuba a kind of stagnant but stable cap for its sugar. And the real issue was that certain parts of the island, like Havana, Santa Clara, were having these booms around tourism, around gambling. But the eastern part of the island was still very agricultural and still very unemployed because it was still stuck in the sugar era. And so really it was a regional inequality thing. Actually, a lot of American capitalists had already sold their sugar by the 1950s, had exited, and that's why you have the return of these Cuban sugar magnates like Julio Lobo in the 1950s and stuff like that. But anyway, we're getting into the weeds. But
that's the great stuff. Yeah.
At least for me and Ian, this is the juice. Yeah. Fascinating. So I think
you touched on something which I think is a big question for me. And I know, look, you've people should seek out. There's some wonderful articles available, and some of your writing online about the current circumstance in Cuba, and
great piece in The Nation.
And so whether it's a consequence of obviously there's sort of like the Trump set of rules, and now we have two sets, but that sort of maybe are part of this the current stagnation. There's obviously COVID had a tremendous impact in Cuba, but I guess part of what I would like to ask you is, I think for a lot of leftists, and I would imagine our listeners are among them, a lot of heat gets thrown at the embargo as like the only reason that Cuba is not succeeding. And obviously, I think for me personally, from my understanding, the embargo is part of it. And Cuban accounts that I have read, even amongst Cubans, there's sort of disagreements about what part the embargo plays. But I guess I'm curious, just from a sort of wider perspective, if we're looking at the Caribbean and looking at other Caribbean economies, obviously, it seems to me that you have instability in part because these are very small places that have limited access to resources. They're extremely climate vulnerable, right? So they're in a position where they face a lot of like regular dramatic climate events, and they're dependent on often sort of exploitative trade balances. And like you're saying that maybe some of the biggest success stories, like, the Dominican Republic or Barbados or whatever, their economy is almost entirely based on either tourism or like financial sector stuff, right? Like offshore banking and this type of thing. So I guess, and then of course you have questions like, how do you maintain an economy in a place like Cuba when people are leaving and there's just kind of like a population decline and all these other complicating factors. But if you had to characterize sort of like the uphill battle that exists right now, what are the factors for you?
So this is easily a 3-hour marathon, but I'm going to try and be as concise. I'm going to try and be as concise as possible. Anyone who says that the embargo doesn't impact Cuba is either lying to themselves or lying to you. Like, it clearly does have an impact.
Of course.
By design. Like, that's why it's on the books. It's kind of like a catch-22. It both... Or Schrodinger's embargo, right? It doesn't do anything if it's a question of does it impact the Cuban people, but it's absolutely essential that we keep it on the books because it keeps the pressure on, right?
That's the policy theory,
Right. But at the same time, like the entire the post Fidel Castro economic reforms are unintelligible outside of the premise that there was a wide consensus that I can attest to in speaking with lots of people, including people who are pro-government intellectuals and officials and stuff, that the Fidel model, economic model, did not work. But it didn't just not work in Cuba, it didn't work in many other countries. This is why you start to see, like after that period of we're going to overtake the capitalists in the 1950s and 1960s, you start to see that falling further and further behind in the 1970s. And by the 1980s, like people talk about the GDR they were living pretty well. Yeah, because they were being floated by Western German debt. They were indebted up to the eyeballs to West Germany. Like that's what was subsidizing the East. So like
and even arguably like a Marx idea that capitalism develops productive capacity, right? I mean, that's like an idea from 150 years ago or something.
Yeah, and Cuba had it. It's absolutely true that Cuba lost billions of rubles per year in subsidies from the USSR. The Cuban economy never was in the black. In the entire Cold War, it was always being subsidized really heavily by the USSR, much to the chagrin of Eastern European countries. Some of them didn't even need Cuban sugar and just bought it out of a sense of political necessity. Or whatever. They had their own sugar beet. Why do they need Cuban sugar? But anyway, the key thing is that Cuban ag does not work. That is one of the core problems. Just to fix, to give a key example. Cuban ag productivity is abysmal. It is not even fully mechanized. In the 90s, people turned to oxen. Now there aren't even oxen.
Wow.
Like there's people like there's in the mid 2000s you had the peak oil movement that tried to paint Cuba as this like eco paradise where everyone was doing everything organic. No, by the 2000s they'd already gone back to pesticides and stuff thanks to Venezuela. But the key thing is like nothing. Cuba imports 60 to 80% of all of its food in a good period like the 2010s.
Okay.
It must be in excess of 90% now. In a country where it's a historical ag country, where up to 70% of the country is good ag land and 90% in a pinch.
And so is that exclusively as a result? I mean, exclusively is a hard thing to prove, but is that as a result of pressure from Western capitalist countries just trying to choke this island out, or is that failures of policy?
Central planning.
It's like the collective Soviet-style collective agriculture did not work. And so there's very low incentives. Everything is extremely disorganized. You have peasants constantly complaining that they'll have a harvest, they'll put it out, and then it'll rot there waiting to be picked up. You have other issues like, for example, if the state is the only buyer and the state inspector comes by and says, we're going to rate your milk quality this. I mean, like, that your milk quality is better, so they should pay you more, but also the state inspector said, this is what it is.
And the state inspector is the state inspector.
And so also you have the problem that So the state has a monopoly on import and export. And so you cannot export for hard currency, which you then reinvest into your farm. You have to sell to the state. You also buy inputs from the state. The state does not have any money, so you cannot buy the imports to produce the goods that you would need to buy actual imports. There is no credit for you, nothing beyond symbolic shit. You cannot rely on the tractor that you are guaranteed for your harvest. You cannot rely on electricity in your house during harvest time. You cannot rely on anything. Nothing works. And so, in this context of all these dysfunctional things, because they failed to reform ag, which is the first thing they did in China and then the first thing they did in Vietnam, it kind of like crippled everything else they tried to do, because the country can't just live on imports. It's not an island that has only one city and no ag. It's a huge country. It is the rest of the insular Caribbean combined in landmass. Yep. There is no reason they should be importing this much food. Zero.
Right. So the lesson for us here in the States, which obviously is an exact, we can just copy and paste what Fidel and Che did to the U.S. with no different.
You didn't watch the
context.
movies. You didn't have a chance to see the movies. So it sounds.
I was tired. I watched Boss Baby again. But so the agriculture securing the breadbasket is step one, and that's not what they did. Historically, the thing to do first in order to make your revolution stick is to get food going. That seems to make logical sense.
It's more like so all of these countries do market reforms because the Soviet model doesn't work, right? So the countries that were successful, China, Vietnam, right? They do market reforms. It starts in ag because that increases the amount of food at that first it spikes and then it goes down because there's more and more supply compared to more or less static demand. And so then because of that, then the farmers are also making money, and then they buy things, and so then there's demand for goods and services from the city, which can then sell it back to the. And so, in the Soviet system, it's like
engine that starts.
You can have piles of money, but not necessarily any goods on the shelves.
Although the only thing I'll say is, I mean, the period of Soviet bureaucratic management of the economy that I believe, my understanding is that is considered the most successful, the NEP period, like right after Lenin gets in charge of the economy, sort of the very, very early stage that I think is sometimes referred to as like the state capitalist stage, where he was encouraging, or I guess they, collectively were encouraging sort of like state managed and backed like competitions. You're sort of retaining some of the elements of like you're saying, not necessarily just like a single bureaucrat coming in and grading your milk or something, but sort of the sense of like who can figure out in our new context the best way to do things, still offering some forms of credit so that people can participate in the wider market. And I think unfortunately Che was rather famous for before he left for Bolivia, he left like this set of documents with this guy Borregos that really wanted to go with him, and was really sad that he didn't get invited on the campaign. But he left a set of documents where he was like,
"Is this the strawberry ice cream guy?"
This is the strawberry ice cream guy. We can tell that story in a second. But this is a dude where he was like, "You can't come with me. One, because you're not ready. Two, because I need you to explain to everybody why actually we shouldn't do the NEP style system, the like Lenin system that was maybe the only thing in like USSR economic history that like worked pretty well and people see as like a maybe viable model for this type of transition." So again, not to hound on the guy, but it does seem like there was this period where they even brought in like I think like Eastern Bloc economists and stuff to give them advice, and maybe they were not that open to the things that people had learned from those mistakes. But yes, there's a strawberry ice cream thing. Jake, do you want to share?
There's a story in the Anderson book about Borregos like brings some strawberry ice cream to the guys who are going to go to Bolivia, right?
He said it's like Che's favorite strawberry ice cream. He buys like.
I also really like strawberry ice cream. And Ernesto Jake Guevara, perhaps.
That's right.
But so they're like giving it out, and then Che gets up in front of everybody and says, like, to Borrego's the guy who brought it, he's like, you can't have seconds because you're not going. Like, this guy isn't coming to Bolivia and thinks he can have seconds. And this apparently really hurts Borrego.
It's like a cute, it's like a Winnie the Pooh story or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really hurts his feelings to the point that Che like immediately apologizes, and I think then like says to the assembled group, like, I was just making a joke or something. And Borrego maintains this is the worst thing Che ever did to him, which, first of all, sounds like a pretty good friend. If that's the worst thing he ever did to you. To sort of bring us home here, I want to talk about what Soderbergh sees, how he sees himself as a Che figure.
Good way to finish here, I think. Yeah.
And kind of where this is in his career and in like the history of cinema. And then I would love, Andres, to pick your brain about some places for listeners to continue their studies if they'd like. But Soderbergh says of Che probably would have hated me. There really wasn't a place for me in the society he wanted to create, but I can still find him one of the most compelling figures of the past century. And the Cuban Revolution was really the last analog revolution. Technology makes it impossible to fight that kind of fight today, which I don't know what he's talking about. First of all, like, really I'm going to send him some links to like Nepal. But I think Soderbergh sees himself as an iconoclast and as a boundary pusher and as an experimenter. This film, obviously, there's the documentary about, or the short doc about shooting this digitally, which is called Che and the Digital Cinema Revolution, which is pretty tasteless considering how many people fought and died for this revolution and had their eyeballs removed. And you're talking about like your new toy. But, this was an early shot in what is now totally commonplace in the whole industry. And they were, the doc goes into like the data backup scheme, like how they literally used up the world's stock of the fast flash cards, 8 gigabyte flash cards that could fit in the camera. They like bought all of the ones in the entire world. There were like 237, and they had a whole scheme where they would fill them up, and then somebody would duplicate them on the set and then back those up to a server, and then they would duplicate them onto a different thing and then send that to the like they'd send those drives out to Madrid to be backed up or something, and then clear the cards in time to send them back to be filled up with new footage. So I think Soderbergh sees himself, and he Sex, Lies, and Videotape, his big Sundance hit, cause a small revolution, a drastic change in like distribution and where Hollywood's focus was.
But then he also tried
the 1990s.
Tried to expand on his technique or repeat it in other contexts and failed, and talked about how he sort of learned that like maybe the context wasn't right for what he was trying to do. Yeah.
He's also a man from, he grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His father taught at LSU. So he was kind of like a smart kid in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, felt out of place, came to LA, felt out of place sort of as a Southerner, and he's like, talks about himself as a kind of removed figure. He clearly is at an emotional remove from his life. That's what a lot of his movies are about. This movie is also about like a guy who's kind of cold and closed off. And I can imagine he saw a kindred spirit in Che, who's this guy who kind of doesn't feel like he fits in anywhere. All of this is to say, like, this movie is one of the many, like, commodity pieces made out of Che Guevara that see him as, like, guy who revolutionized. And so that can also apply to me, the founder of an NFT startup. I'm revolutionizing just like Che. And so I wondered to what extent, because the film, it elides so much and it does the thing that it does. And we, obviously there's a lot of, we could make a movie entirely about economic policy, and it would be fascinating to the three of us, and everyone else on Earth would shoot themselves in the head instead of seeing it. But I wonder to what extent the movie is like, just another T-shirt,
I mean,
to what extent is the movie it's not a t-shirt that says like this guy was a murderer in the way a lot of t-shirts could be, but like do we think that the film is where do we think the film stands on the sort of pure commodity to like object of cultural import spectrum?
I think it's very goofy for any extremely wealthy and successful director to imagine themselves as being functionally equivalent to a revolutionary in the mid-century who was, nearly dying of asthma in the jungle and stuff, regardless of what you think about his ideology. But I will say, if I can defend Soderbergh a tiny bit, despite the silliness of that implicit idea, I think I want to credit this as a cultural object in that this is maybe Soderbergh at his most Marxist, not in the sense of being pro-socialism, but in the sort of like a historian Marxist sense of like what he is trying to do in this movie. And what I think Soderbergh is interested in also in his own past is like, why did this person do this in this context? What was he interested in? And I do think that if they do have something in common, I think that Soderbergh, anytime he is making a choice, it is like a sincere choice based on the context in which it is made, right? So that doesn't mean that like he's always making the thing he cares about the most, but he does believe that what he is doing is right for the moment. And I think that's my perception of Che, right? Again, so sort of like ignoring whether you agree with his ideology, all of my readings that we did in preparation for this make him seem like a sincere person who was considering whatever he was doing and trying to understand why it made sense for the moment, and giving it a lot of thought and paying attention to discipline and the way you do something, which I think is an extremely Soderberghian choice, right? To say like the process of doing something is as important as the result, and the techniques you use sort of will color what comes out of it. And I think it makes sense for that reason that I think I'll just identify just as kind of like an unimportant point. But I think part 2 of this film is late Soderbergh style, maybe the biggest example we've had of that so far. So in the future, we're going to talk about Contagion and Girlfriend Experience and the Nick, the series. I think the shooting style that he develops in that second part of the movie, that coldness, that flat sort of low contrast, the ellipses, but not necessarily like the complex sort of more French New Wavy style of the first movie, but rather sort of this like ellipses that will just jump into like the next part of the story. So it's like contiguous, but with missing pieces.
And asking the audience to use their brains. Yeah,
to fill in the gaps. Yeah. I think that's, it makes sense to me that what Soderbergh would take out of this more than a new interest in leftism, which I'm not sure he had by the end, but what I think he had was this sense of like, all right, I'm going to double down on continuing to evolve what I want to be doing and using the tools that are available to me. So,
well, considering he came out of his experience in Bolivia, deciding to launch a Singani import, he has his own celebrity liquor, the national brandy of Bolivia, which has like its own sort of DOP like legal status. He decides to extract from the global south and put his own face on a bottle of national product of Bolivia. I don't think he came out of this an impassioned leftist, but he does come out of this, with new techniques and with his own sort of guerrilla shooting style.
Although he's
sort of run and gun style.
Like Che, he also plans to basically like his film career to be dead by this. After he finishes this movie, he's so depressed that he says, I'm going to finish the other 3 films that I'm working on and I'm going to quit Hollywood because...
Yeah, and interviewers will say, do you regret making this? And he says yes before they can finish the question. But Andres, I'm curious what you think of this film as like, impressively non-schmaltzy Hollywood product, or is there, is this worth a look for scholars or for people with a serious interest in this history?
I will. You guys have like an interest in like the art side of it, right? And it definitely feels. I definitely feel out of my depth there.
That's okay.
Yeah. No, but I'm just saying, like, my lens is very much like much more utilitarian. I can see using this in a classroom setting as a way to because like the factual stuff is accurate, sometimes impressively so, and it expects lots from the viewer, and that's something great where you can use it to assign it to people, and then like they can build on. And at the same time, it's also a great piece for conversations because there are a lot. There isn't a moment where the director turns in character to the camera and gives you his analysis, right?
Yeah,
right.
And that allows for space for you to like then use it in a classroom setting to be like, okay,
sure.
What are the implicit arguments? What is the implicit, what is the result, intended or not? We don't know the author intent of cutting this out, including this, doing this. Yeah. I liked it, and I hated the Cuba Libre story on Netflix. That docuseries, I hate it with a passion. It is terrible, and it gets worse as it gets closer to the 20th century. But like this is, I think it's genuinely well done. I like the first half more than the latter, but I think that's a question of taste. But actually, Ian has convinced me of the arc now that he's like pointed it out early in the episode. I'm like, you know what? No, like it's like the building of his confidence, and then this in the first half, and then the second half is the destruction of that confidence.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, you know what? You've won me over, Andres. I think, maybe we expect a lot sometimes, especially going into a 2-part film about Che Guevara. We here on the Leftist Film Podcast, we're maybe expecting quite a bit. But I think by allowing space for conversation, by not holding your hand, by taking an extremely historical, but also like, what would it feel like to be in the Sierra or in Bolivia approach? This is providing a certain something that like just reading a book doesn't, or just reading the diaries doesn't give you the full, like the claustrophobia of the trees, or like, I just, one thing that stood out when they're in Bolivia and Monge has just, he's like comes to the sort of planning table to say like, I'm leaving, and they're like, okay, well, fine. But like looking at their table, which is like some lashed together, like cut down trees, I just thought like, what a fucking horrible table. And they had to like plan, you have to put a map on like a bunch of lumps.
Yeah, they do a lot of procedural, like how did they build this structure that they had meetings in, and
that sort of stuff is like, that's, I don't know, that's kind of like the Colonial Williamsburg, that's the sort of tactile history stuff that can put the picture together better. And look, the fact that a bunch of people were yelling at him in Miami when he showed this movie means that I think he did a better job than a lot of the Omar Sharif one or whatever. Ian, any sort of final thoughts here before we get some recs from
I don't
Andres?
think so. I'm excited to see. We've touched on. I don't remember what was the context in which we brought up like memories of underdevelopment and Sara Gomez and stuff. But
Havana, when we talked about
of course
this kind of schmaltzier film with the late Robert Redford called Havana from 1990 or something, where he is like an American guy in Havana. It's kind of like you've seen Godfather 2 too many times and you want like a guy
in like
in a different building on the same street
or whatever, like, he's
but we talked about some of that stuff, so our listeners are probably familiar with Memories of Underdevelopment and Soy Cuba and some of this stuff, but Andres, are there any films
or
and
texts or anything
approachable maybe texts for the non Cuban history PhD candidate that you would recommend to our interested listeners?
Sure. I mean, like in terms of film, just like the Memories of Underdevelopment, probably the best Cuban film produced. But another really impactful one that I really recommend to folks is Fresas y Chocolate, Strawberries and Chocolate, which was very pivotal in the kind of opening up on LGBTQ issues in the 1990s. And it was really well done. Actually, one of the actors in this movie, Jorge Perugueria, is in that movie.
Oh, great.
So I really recommend it. It's like gay people are finally allowed to have jobs in while being openly gay in the 1990s. Huge change from previous decades, and the forced labor camps to make them straight in the 60s. One of the things we didn't get into, the Wanahakabibis camp, with Che possibly having a role in it, but we don't really know enough about the Wanahakabibis. Sure. So anyway, more to the topic of books. There's a bunch of really cool books that have come out in the last couple decades. For anything related to Cuba and Africa, Piero Gleijeses is the GOAT. And
I believe he features in Blowback, this recent season of Blowback on microphone. Maybe is he still around?
He is married to Yoko Ono's sister. Fun fact.
Whoa!
Wow!
That's very odd.
See, there's 2 degrees. There's something everywhere. Yeah.
And but so I think to understand kind of like the politics, economics, and society of Cuba in the 1960s. That'll help contextualize the film a lot better, especially the gap years. Lillian Guerra's Visions of Power in Cuba is really great because it doesn't try to do Fidel top-down history. It's like a social history of politics in the 1960s. Okay. It's really great. And there is a chapter on film, like how they're trying to film something, and they have like state security agents clearly watching them. And so that's and then the other another key book is Our Comrades in Havana, which is going to give readers that kind of Soviet Cuba context from archives. That's going to really help you like get that part of it.
I think I saw on Twitter when you were reading that book, I think you were posting little snippets from it of interest, I believe. Our Comrades in Havana. It looks fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's super accessible as well. Really recommend it. And yeah, I mean, there's a bunch more that I can recommend, but I mean,
by all means, we'd love to share.
If you make a list, we'll post a list with the episodes so people can go.
We love to force a rec list on our listeners, and I think at least one of them likes it. Well, that I think is probably going to do it for our Che episode. We have one more. You know what? Kimmy,
did you finish your research? Yeah.
This Che guy sounds really fascinating.
I agree.
I just got to the part where he rode around on a motorcycle and experienced the extraordinary dispossession of poor Latin Americans.
Yeah. It's not even...
Guys, are you still there?
Yes, we are. I think maybe I'm having a connection slow down. Kimmy, I'm sorry that... would you like to introduce our final segment, Kimmy?
This is Popcornopolis, the segment where we ask our guest, do you like popcorn?
Andres, do you like popcorn?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Is there a Cuban, anything to do with popcorn and Cuba that you can share with us? What do Cubans watch or eat at the movie theater?
Popcorn.
Mm-hmm. Popcorn.
Cuba does like corn.
They're just like me.
Yeah. Actually, the reason that the word for corn in a lot of cultures is maíz or maize is because the Caribbean was colonized first, and that's the Taíno word for it. So, that's why you call it maize.
Damn, we got ourselves we got a historian on our show. Well, thank you, Andres. Is there anything you would like to plug? Anywhere people can check out more of your work or more of what you got going on?
Sure. I am on Twitter and Blue Sky for my sins. I have. You can just search my name and my account's just gonna pop up. I write pretty regularly for Dissent Magazine, among others. I do have a podcast of my own on Cuban history called Orígenes, a Cuban history podcast, where I'm trying to go from the very, very beginning. And
everything people wanted to hear on this episode, now you can go to find it out for real. Yeah.
Starting with prehistory.
Yeah.
I mean, look,
it's a historian podcast, so you can talk.
Good place to start.
Shifting sands, geological formation, that stuff's good too. You know.
Ian loves all that stuff. Shells. Well, thank you so much, Andres. We first started chatting back when we were preparing for our episode on Heartbreak Ridge and talking about Grenada, and you very graciously said that. That's not your area quite, and so I'm very glad that we were able to
2 years later
laser focus on Cuba.
Yeah, we found it.
Wonderful conversation with you. Thank you so much for your time, for watching a 4.5-hour movie as well.
I appreciate it. I enjoyed the movie, so that's
I'm
thank
so
you
glad
for having me on.
Absolutely. As for us, remember to subscribe, rate us, write a review. It helps us on the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad, write a letter to Fidel Castro. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Podcastiforme. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or you're interested in co-hosting a two-person Steven Soderbergh podcast, you can email us at podcastiforme@gmail.com. All of this is at podcastiforme.com. Thank you to Jeremy Allison for our artwork. We'll be back in 2 weeks, if you can't wait that long. Next week on the Patreon, we are... I'll just say we're drinking Singani 63 and talking about it.
Yep, we got some of this alcohol.
We got some of it. I smuggled it into Mexico to give to Ian in a series of little toiletry bottles that I got from CVS. I filled them all up with Bolivian brandy. So if you want to know what that tastes like and more about this man's weird vanity alcohol, $5 a month, patreon.com/podcastiforme. That's going to do it for us. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Or, as they say in Cuba,
adios.